morning, everyone. Welcome back to the 2020 Budget Committee. And I have a new mic, and I'm hoping everyone can hear me today. It looks like everyone can hear me today. I'm getting thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. I don't see any regrets from members of the committee. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? See none. Then any member of the public wishing to speak further regarding an issue on the 2020 Budget Committee agenda for today may appear before Council at its meeting on December 16th, 2019 at 7 p.m. when the recommendations from this meeting will go forward for final consideration. If you wish to speak as a delegation, please sign the sheet located at the back of the room or notify the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the Council meeting. Any PowerPoint presentations must also be forwarded to the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the meeting. Members of committee, we have no consent items or confidential consent items, but we do have two hefty presentations that should be on your desk, and they deal with both the Community Services Commission and the Community Development Commission. We will go through those two presentations and go through any questions that might come from them. We did have some presentations the other day, and so if there are some remaining questions that anybody wants to bring up now that you've had a good 48 hours to read budget books all night long, we can go back to those as well. Okay? We have, in addition to those two presentations, we have a number of agenda items dealing with harbors, the loose leaf collection, and traffic calming and speed enforcement. We can deal with those as we get to the end of the meeting as well. I'm assuming that some of that material is talked about in these two sets of presentations. So, Ms. Bell, I believe you're first up. Welcome to the podium. We look forward to all of your information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? No.
You need my mic.
I can move mine up.
Oh, let me forget.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Budget Committee. I am very pleased to present the Community Services Commission's budget for 2020. What you see here on this slide is the tabs where all of the information related to our commission can be found. As you can see, we represent emergency services, recreation and culture, library, parks, and open space, cemeteries, harbors, infrastructure maintenance, and Oakville Transit. Our gross budget for community services is $188.3 million. What we do is we do generate $55.2 million in revenue to offset. No. I apologize. Okay, here we go. To offset, and our net budget is $133 million. As you can see, our biggest cost is actually in personnel, and that's because of our collective bargaining agreements, the movement through various wage grades, and firefighter recognition. And the next largest one is purchase services, which is a lot of our contracted services. Our gross operating budget, as you see, is $188 million. Our three largest areas are emergency services at $20.9 million, infrastructure maintenance at $19.3 million, and Oakville Transit at $18 million. Our net operating budget, the three biggest areas again are emergency services, transit, and infrastructure maintenance. Our 2019 accomplishments, there's three main areas. The first one is providing recreational and cultural events and spaces that promote shared community experiences. We are very pleased that we were able to open the beautiful Tannery Waterworks Park very recently, a very bright and sunny day, but it's a little cold. And also we opened William Rose, Fowley, and Wyndham Parks. We also, for the benefit of our boaters, reopened the launch ramp at Bronte Beach Park. If you will remember, it was badly damaged in the 2017 flooding. So the Oakville Public Library has also expanded their service into North Oakville in badly needed areas. So we have opened the 16-mile temporary library, which has been very well received by the community. And we have also opened what's known as OPL Express locations. So those are lending kiosks that we have put in a variety of areas to expand the service without actually having to build a facility. We have also been planning for future amenities to the community as well. We recently completed a community-wide plan to make our recreational trail system more accessible. Council recently approved the refreshed design for Town Square, and we're looking forward to that being opened in the future. As part of provincial funding requirements, the museum has completed a museum strategic plan that will be coming forward to Council shortly. And we have also received grant funding so that we can repurpose the coach house on Ercles Estate and repurpose it for community use in the future. So we're very excited about that. From an engaged community standpoint, Fire has been very busy working on moving the bar on their diversity and inclusion program with the new partnership with Halton Multicultural Association, and also the introduction of Camp Molly. For those of you who are not familiar, Camp Molly was introduced this year for 24 young women between the ages of 15 to 18 to introduce them to the modern fire service and all of the various aspects that that profession now provides. It was hugely successful. We did it in partnership with Burlington and Milton Fire. Fire also implemented, excuse me, they expanded their fire prevention education course for children between the ages of kindergarten to grade 4. As you know, studies have shown that if you want to achieve any sort of behavior change, you start with young children. So we anticipate that we are going to have a lot of fire safety advocates in the near future. Transit also expanded home-to-hub services for new and underserved areas of the town, and that's been hugely successful. And in concert with that, we have also launched a new fully accessible demand response riding tool so that people can book their own rides online. And we are looking at doing an enhancement in 2020. From an accountability standpoint, there's 3 main areas that we focused on in 2019. One was process reengineering to modernize our services. We looked at technology and how we could leverage technology more effectively. And we also looked at our data analytics to do better programming, and so that we are ensuring that our programming is as relevant as it should be for a very changing community. The first thing that we worked on was the flood response. As you know, the flood of 2017 was supposed to be the flood of the century. This year, we had yet another round of flooding that was actually more severe. The only reason that it didn't seem to do as much damage is that the lake cooperated and was actually unusually calm this year. However, from a response standpoint, we were able to take the experience of 2017 and we were able to add data sets and do better analysis of how to respond to the ongoing threat from the lake. We also introduced camps.oakville.ca to help parents more easily find summer camps. As you know, summer camps in Oakville have become incredibly popular, and parents are always trying to get in their children as quickly as they can, and this has been an incredibly helpful app that people have really enjoyed using. Fire spent a lot of time re-engineering their processes for MTO and billing, and also in-town, so those are in-town incident cost recovery billing program. This led to a massive increase in the revenue that was being collected, and so now we collect at least $135,000 a year. It was a very small amount prior to that re-engineering. Fire has also implemented a fully electronic process with regard to MTO mandated circle checks. So what happens is that the information is automatically sent to a supervisor by 10 o'clock in the morning, and they know whether the circle check has been done and whether there's been any deficiencies identified. Fire also implemented a technology-enabled post-incident analysis process. So in the past, after a significant incident, the crews involved would meet at a central location and meet and do a debrief. Now we're able to do that electronically, and it ensures that our crews are able to get back out in order to respond to any calls more quickly, and that's proven to be very successful. The other thing that Fire has done is they've also implemented on-shift training instructors for hazmat and medical. So what that means is we are able to leverage the experience and talent of our team in suppression, and they are providing that training for their crews at the station. They also implemented a driver training program. This was actually a refresh, and what it was specifically geared to is for situations where the crews are actually responding, but they are encountering unusual situations, and how to do defensive driving in those situations where they're responding, but there are strange things happening on the road. And that was very successful as well, and also we have certification program now for pump. Our program outcomes, I think that we held very steady this year. If you can see with the minimum maintenance standard deficiencies per lane, we anticipate that we will be holding steady. The statistics are just till October 30th. The percentage of respondents satisfied with winter road and sidewalk maintenance varies from year to year. Essentially what is the defining driving factor for the level of satisfaction is how much snow we actually received in a given year. So if we have a large number of snow events, the likelihood of people being fully satisfied will drop exponentially. The number of active library card holders per capita is sitting at 30.4. One of the reasons why that's dropped a little bit is because we have done major renovations to two of the busiest libraries, Iroquois Ridge a couple of years ago, and Glen Abbey, which is the busiest library in the whole system. And we anticipate that that number will actually go up once that library branch opens again in Q1 of 2020. The library collection breakdown, you will notice that it has stayed essentially static at the 30% digital and 70% print. That's a little bit artificial, to be quite honest. One of the reasons why that has stayed static is that the cost of digital products is more expensive than print. And so for libraries to be able to access those products, it is proving to be very challenging. They have been working with the publishers to try and see if they can get a better rate, specifically for library systems. However, we, as a system, have not been successful. So there is an advocacy effort that is going on nationally to the federal government to see if there can be some sort of work done with the publishing industry to work to see if they can get better rates on digital, because we do know that our citizens love the digital products, but the offerings that the library is able to provide is somewhat limited. The next one is the annual number of public transit trips per capita. Generally speaking, that's held steady. One thing I did want to highlight, though, that this is the second year in a row that transit has seen more than 3 million rides. So that's a huge achievement. And the transit on-time performance is sitting at 84%. The way that on-time performance is defined, it is 1 minute early to 3 minutes late. And that's the range that is used as a standard across the industry. In terms of the percentage of response crew travel time for fire, as you can see, we are sitting, and this is the second year in a row where we're sitting at about 60%. There are three main factors that influence that. One is construction on the road. As you know, our road network has undergone some significant construction over the last 2 or 3 years. Traffic congestion, which is a combination of response to the construction projects, but also our population is actually increasing, and intensification in certain areas, is the other one. And this goes till, this is as of September 30th. The number of fire-related injuries is sitting at 2.3 as of September 30th. Our participation hours for recreation programs per capita is sitting at 19. And our recreation program capacity rates is holding steady at 75%. One thing you will notice is our facility visits continue to go up, and that is in part because we are bringing on new facilities that people are clearly enjoying. On average for kilometers of trails, we add between 2 and 4 kilometers to our trail system each year, and for 2019 we added 2. The number of trees and shrubs planted this year was 37,879, and I would like to take this moment to, in addition to thanking our forestry teams, also acknowledge all of the volunteer groups that come out every year to assist us. We've had some extraordinary participation, and we really appreciate the level of interest and enthusiasm that our residents demonstrate in this area. Our 2020 initiatives, we are going to be opening the long-awaited Oakville Trafalgar Community Center and Park. If the pictures are anything to go by now, it's going to be absolutely stunning, and we anticipate that it will be incredibly well used by everyone, across Oakville. We will be finishing phase 3 of the improvements to South Shell Park. The 3 main areas of improvement are in the area of accessibility. We're adding 2 new sets of stairs so that people can more easily access the waterfront. And we are going to be adding more benches, trees, and shrubs to that area. So we anticipate it will get a lot of use. We are going to be reopening the renovated Glen Abbey Library Branch and New Creation Zone in early 2020. To give you a sense of what we anticipate for the Creation Zone, when we reopened Iroquois Ridge with the first Creation Zone in Oakville, we had 1,200 people lined up on the first day to come in. And so which was not quite what we anticipated, but the staff were absolutely delighted. We will also be introducing a Nova branch at St. Luke's and QEPCC. So what that is a lending kiosk where you can borrow and browse. So that's all part of the self-serve options that we have been expanding to ensure that we're trying to maximize our outreach to all of Oakville with respect to the library. We are entering into detailed design for Wallace Park. If you will remember that we did an extensive consultation on Wallace Park when we were doing the consultations around Brantwood Park and also the main park at Oakville Trafalgar. And the reason why we wanted to do that was to ensure that we were looking at the whole area as a campus of parks and what the different use would be. And so now we're at a point where we can proceed with Wallace Park. We also will be bringing forward the long-awaited Harbor Master Plan. We are very close to completion in terms of the work that we needed to do for the cultural heritage landscapes. So you will be seeing those reports come forward, and then the Harbor Master Plan will come immediately following. For the environment, as you are probably all familiar now, we have put forward our report to Council for ICIP funding for transit, and as a result of that funding, we will be introducing the first battery electric vehicles for our on-demand fleet, and that will be 6 of them. And everyone is extremely excited about that. And we are hoping with the ICIP funding that we will be able to do a full greening over the next few years of our fleet. We are also doing an update on the urban forest management plan. This is something that we do every few years, and that's to ensure that we are putting together sustainable strategies to maintain and grow our tree canopy. From an accountable government standpoint, again, this is around continuous improvement. I mentioned earlier that we had installed the on-demand scheduling software. This launch of the upgrade takes us to the next level. This will be very similar experience for our riders to if they were to actually use an Uber or a Lyft type experience. The ride hailing can be done in real time, whereas currently when someone wants to book a ride, there is a 2-hour lapse, and so this will be real-time experience. So this is a huge customer service improvement, and it also will allow us to actually put together on-demand scheduling within an area, a specific area or zone. We also are launching the onboard Wi-Fi across the transit fleet, and one of the benefits of that, aside from the fact that our customers will be able to use it, it also will allow for full automation of our onboard camera system as well, so which will be extremely helpful from a back office standpoint. We are also significantly upgrading our bus stop accessibility infrastructure. We feel this is really important, particularly from the standpoint we want every resident to be able to use transit and find it easy to use, and that includes this type of infrastructure. We will also be upgrading our intelligent transportation system, so that's a mobile app that tells you in real time when your bus is coming. And the reason why we're doing the upgrade is to ensure that the data we are providing our customers is stable and precise. Fire will be undertaking their 5-year review of the 2015 Fire Master Plan, which is a requirement for DC funding. And a new issue that we have not had to do in previous years is the legislation has changed, and fire is required to do a very comprehensive community risk assessment program every 5 years. So we have decided to align it with when we bring in our Fire Master Plan. And this goes into a lot more depth in terms of identifying vulnerable buildings, areas of risk, and it requires a lot more detailed analysis than what we have done in the past. And as part of that, we will also be doing the standards of cover study as well, and that's the coverage across the town. We will be opening Fire Station 8. You will, if you will recall around our response times, Fire Station 8 will be a huge assistance in terms of our response times, particularly in North Oakville. And when Fire Station 9 comes on in 2025, again, it will improve our response times in the northern part of the town. We, as standard procedure, we always update our emergency plan. And just so you know, we do at least 2 to 3 exercises a year with our staff. And we make sure that not only are the first lead group trained, but also other staff that are trained to ensure that we have depth of coverage and expertise throughout the organization. And we will also be completing the Harbor Business Plan. If you remember, there was a recent report that went to council requesting permission to go out to an RFI, and we are proceeding with that work, and we will be reporting back in 2020. Community Services has undergone a number of continuous improvement initiatives. Recreation and Culture is actually participating in 4, but 2 that are directly led by Recreation and Culture is the Departmental Service Review, the Lean Special Events Review, and they're also participating in the Call Center Consolidation Study and the Facility Service Review as well. Roads and Works and Parks and Open Space will be beginning the Fleet Utilization Study, and that's to look at all of our equipment and how we can leverage and maximize the use of it in a manner that will be more cost efficient. Fire Services is undergoing an accreditation process that is overseen by an international public safety body, and a number of municipalities across Canada have undertaken this, and it is the fire version of a service review. So they look at every single process that they undertake, they look for efficiencies and ways that they can improve, and then they have to present their findings with their action plans before a tribunal in order to get properly certified. City of Ottawa, City of Guelph, Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, St. Albert, and I believe Toronto have already undergone this process, Guelph has actually been certified for the second year in a row. But this is really important work from the standpoint of continuous improvement and looking at better ways to do business. The Oakville Public Library is continuing their work around one-desk conversion. For those of you who remember the traditional way of doing business in the library system, they would have sort of an information desk and then there would be a separate circulation desk. What they are doing is they're consolidating these two teams for greater efficiency, and this one-desk conversion is specific now to the Central Library. I'd like to give you a little more detail on the Recreation and Culture Service Review because you will not have heard much about it. So if you remember, Recreation and Culture was chosen as one of the first departments to undergo an extensive service review as part of our continuous improvement work. The reason for that was because we were experiencing rapid growth, both in facilities and participation. If you remember, the provincial government recently, it seems recent, it was probably 2 years ago, raised the minimum wage. And what that did for the recreation budget is it created an over $800,000 impact that was not anticipated. So it put an incredible pressure on the actual budget. So we need to look at different ways of doing business. So what we did was before the service review actually got started, we did a phase one. And so what that phase one was, we took 3 technical teams out of Recreation and Culture, and this, represented staff both at a senior, middle, and junior level. So it was a cross-cut through the organization, and we looked at our support services, our direct program delivery, and our partnerships. And as a result of doing that work in advance of the consultants coming on board, we actually identified quick wins of $193,000. And that was in terms of savings. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to kickstart a change in our culture in terms of looking at efficiencies and continuous improvement so that when we began to meet with the consultants, we were hitting the ground running. So we worked with the consultants on phase 2. The completion of the service review has been done. We are actually now in implementation. One of the things that we are going to be doing is we have prioritized 3 key areas that we will be reporting to you on in June of 2020. The 3 areas are, and these are areas that will give us the tools we need in order to be able to respond to different opportunities. The program assessment framework, so that's where we assess our current program offerings and determine what stays and what goes. We are looking at a partnership strategy in situations where we believe that a program should still be provided, but perhaps we are not the right vehicle to do that. And we are also looking at facility repurposing strategy, and we're looking at that in a couple of different ways. Several municipalities have already done reviews of their facilities and have determined that they either need to repurpose them into a new use. So for example, single pad arenas have been looked at by a number of municipalities with the notion that perhaps they get converted permanently into, for example, a skateboard park that's indoor, or indoor soccer, or some other sort of land sport use, and to ensure that the facilities remain relevant. The other thing that they have been doing, and we have started to do as well, is to look at specific spaces within our community centers that may not be as relevant as they were when they were first built. So an example of that would be the shooter pads at River Oaks. We have a lot of capacity in our shooter pads. They're still very popular. However, we don't have the same numbers we did 5 years ago. So one of the things we're looking at is, do we not operate that as a shooter pad, but instead look at multi-purpose community rooms, which are always in need of and would allow us to do a different type of programming. So that's what the facility repurposing strategy is. Efficiencies to date, so obviously we did quick wins. We found $193,000 in savings before the service review started. And in addition to that, as part of the service review, we looked at our staffing structure and looked at a way that we could actually mitigate some of the costs of opening Oakville Trafalgar Community Center. And as a result, we were able to come up with additional dollars. So as a result of the quick wins and the reassignment of staff, we have total savings coming out of the preliminary work we've done for our service review of $618,000. So we're very pleased to have that as our starting point. It also eliminated the need for tax stabilization funding. So when that $800,000 impact first came up, we decided that what we would do is we would plug the budget with $500,000 each year until we had been able to come up with a new plan, which we have. But I do want to emphasize that Recreation and Culture worked very hard over the last 2 years around their budgets, and we have never used the $500,000 in either year. So I wanted to mention that as well. So the community services tax levy by program, the three biggest areas, again, as you can see, are our emergency services, Oakville Transit, and infrastructure maintenance. For the 2020 budget increase, community services for 2020 found savings of $1,371,000. Each of the groups found it in different ways. Everyone took an approach that made sense for their department. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize is that before you look at the increases, you should know what the base budgets were going in. So emergency services base budget came in at 1% before growth. Recreation and Culture actually had a base budget decrease of 0.5%. Oakville Public Library reduced theirs by 0.9%. Parks and Open Space reduced theirs by 1.1%. Infrastructure and Maintenance held the line with 1.7%. And Oakville Transit was able to hold their base budget at 1%. So what that basically says is that the $4.8 million is all basically growth. So it's the opening of the Fire Station 8, it's the opening of Oakville Trafalgar Community Center, it's and the park, it's the other parks that have come on board where we're now going to be doing parks maintenance and additional trails. It's the road maintenance for new subdivisions, and it's the 6 new electric buses. For council reports and referrals, you will see that there is a Harbor's Infrastructure Renewal Program. Chris Mark will be speaking further to that. What that is based on our 2 floods that extended for several months, severe damage was done to the dockage, particularly in Oyster Bay. We tried to repair the dockage repeatedly. This past year, we had a severe, we had a severe storm, we repaired, we had another severe storm, we repaired again, but we're now in a situation where the dockage is really, really unsafe. And so what we want to do is to come up with a program to replace that dockage in Oakville Harbor and Bronte Harbor. Last year, the Budget Committee asked for a loose leaf collection service review to be done. Enrico Scalera will be speaking to that as well. And at the meeting on Tuesday, Councillor asked for Recreation Connection Subsidy update. So there is a memo that has been distributed to everyone. Just so that you are aware, the Recreation and Connection Subsidy, almost all major sports organizations, the YMCA and other municipalities offer these types of subsidies. On our website, we advertise not only that the town does provide subsidy with what the eligibility criteria and the process is, but we also highlight the fact that Halton Region also provides subsidy for families in need. And another big one, which you may not be aware of, is Canadian Tire has a Jumpstart program, and they also provide subsidies to family in need. So there's a number of groups that we coordinate with around this particular piece. And what we find is that families tend to use the subsidy in two key areas: learn to swim for their children and children's programs. And that's primarily the area that they work. Other reports that you had requested is you have already received the transit ICIP funding, and that, as Catherine Hewitson had indicated, is in the base budget. You'd also asked for use of Coronation Park, and there was a request for us to check with the BIAs whether or not they would be interested in supporting music events in Coronation Park. We did not bring this report forward at this time, only because there is no financial impact, because there is a lack of interest from the BIAs around a music series. The Canada Day Transportation Report, we are still working with the Bronte BIA around that. However, we don't anticipate there will be any budget impact to the town in regard to that report, so that report will be coming in Q1 of 2020. If you remember, in 2017, we were not able to identify all of the damage that had been sustained by the 2017 flood until after the budget process. It was towards the end of the year when the lake level had sufficiently gone down. We are finding the same situation this year. We are only able to send out a drone in the next 2 weeks, where we will actually be able to truly see what the level of damage is. So what we will be doing is bringing forward a report in Q1 of 2020 where we have a comprehensive inventory of what that damage might look like. We're hopeful that with some of the work that was done in 2018, that the damage sustained will not be as challenging as it was in 2020, and also because the lake cooperated, you don't have that constant pounding as well that led to a lot of damage taking place. Our capital budget highlights are in a few areas. The biggest one is vehicle and equipment replacement in fire, roads and works, and parks. The Oakville Trafalgar Community Center will be finished in 2020, and I look forward to the celebration. We do standard facilities renewal. Most of this is tied to the repair to Pad B at River Oaks. Parks renewal, that's replacement of playground equipment, repairing splash pads, those kinds of things. Fire Station 8 will be completed in 2020, and new buses, vehicles, and equipment, and the EAB program, which sits at $2.2 million. The EAB program, just so you know, is now in the sort of the final phases of the program. It's at the regeneration stage. We are continuing to inject trees until 2026 as per council direction, but we're really at the point where we're doing more regeneration, tree planting, and associated work like that. The capital budget for community services is $45.7 million. The biggest area sits in transit. Transit because of the buses. And then we are looking at parks and open space and recreation. The budget by category, community enhancements are Oakville Trafalgar Community Center. EAB is the strategic priorities. The biggest piece for growth is actually Fire Station 8, and the remainder is general renewal around facilities, replacing equipment, etc. Thank you very much.
I'm guessing there'll be some questions. Who's first? No one wants to be first? There, Councillor O'Meara.
I was trying to give deference over to my committee members, but if they're not ready to go, I'm happy to. Thank you. Just a couple of questions, Commissioner. Thank you for that. What's the plan for Coronation Park? Either to do a study about infrastructure to support it, or, I mean, for the past 3 years now, a large majority of it has been closed, and I don't see any plans about what we're going to be doing about that, or where we're going to be spending any money to figure out what we're going to be doing about that, or if we can do anything about that at all.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we're actually looking at it from a different, a bigger perspective. The province hired a special advisor to look at the whole flood situation across the province. We're waiting for the report to come out on that. And then based on that direction, and if there's opportunity, for example, for any type of remediation funding, we would be looking at that specifically with regard to Coronation Park. Our intent is that once that report comes out, our flood team is going to take a look at the report, and then we will have also our full inventory of the damage that's been done. And I think we're all at a point where we're concerned that these flooding events are not one-offs anymore, that we may be looking at sustained problems over the longer term as a result of Plan 2014. So we're looking at sort of the bigger picture, but Coronation Park is definitely an area of concern. The team is also going to be looking at what we do around what's actually allowed in Coronation Park while we sort out what we can do in terms of flood mitigation. Because this year, once again, once the flooding started, there was no permitting of special events in Coronation Park other than picnic permits where we could ensure that people were in a safe place.
And I appreciate that. So so we're waiting back from the province to figure out remediation, but I think, and I agree with you, that going forward, the only thing we're sure of is that we can't be sure of anything in that park. So are we starting to begin about, regardless of what we can fix now, where we think, or what we think we're going to have to do to this park in 5 years and 10 years to make it usable permanently, or not?
We will be doing that as part of this work, because we're going to have to look at all our waterfront parks, because we now have new ones coming on as well, in terms of what is the strategy going forward. And if we want to hold special events in those parks, what is the remediation that's going to have to be done to ensure that they're not flooding out every single year?
Okay, thank you for that. I have a question as well, just a clarification on the comment you made about a lack of interest from the BIAs in a music series. Was that just for Coronation Park, or do you mean?
That was specifically for Coronation Park.
Perfect, thanks. Question in terms of the Wi-Fi on transit, is that to assist with the buses, or is that simply for a customer service addition?
So the Wi-Fi on the buses is twofold. One is so that customers can access it, but what it does from a back of house end of things is it automates our onboard camera system for automatic downloading. So if we had a situation in real time, we would be able to download the information right on the spot, which is really important from a response standpoint. Okay,
so we wouldn't be able to get like an SD card, like most of our vehicles have cameras in there and you can just get the card and read it right away. That's not good enough for that?
So what happens is, if you have an incident, the bus has to come back to the transit facility and you can have loss of time. And we may have a situation that is in play, so it's important that we can actually access it as it's happening.
Is there a cost for that we have to install Wi-Fi on all the buses?
So the Wi-Fi was part of the ICIP funding. So when we wouldn't be doing it if we weren't able to access the ICIP funding.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question has to do with, we track a lot of things in the fire, the time and these things. Do we track how long it takes for fire to sign off on building permits? Or would that be under Commissioner Closey's wheelhouse? I'm not sure where that is.
We'll get back to you and find out what that information might be.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor
Elgar.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Colleen. Appreciate it. If we go to slide 15, Colleen, I'm just trying to understand the numbers in a simple way here. where you get to rec and culture, the restated 2019 budget is 17.8 million. Then you went on to say about how we had 500,000 in there from tax stabilization. Is the 500,000 in the 17.8?
The 500,000 is not
It's not. Okay, I appreciate that.
for, 2019 it was, but we didn't spend it.
Now you've got to where I really want to go with the whole budget process. So what really is our projected forecast year-end budget for 2019 actual, based on, like, we do it on budget, and we do, and this is like, it's not a shot at anybody, just saying, most businesses, you would have a budget, and you would have a projected year-end budget. Do we do that? Because I don't see it anywhere on any budget material ever, projected year-end actual.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we used to include it on the budget documents. We certainly could do that. Where we show that is in the quarterly progress report. So there is one coming to council in December for the third quarter, and it will have projections for year end. The most recent one that council would have received was in September, and that was for the June 30th with projections.
But there's no correlate, when you're looking at the whole budget process, there's nothing in here to show you our projected year end. Because if I look at the 17.8% or million, if I take out the 500,000, instead of a 4.9% increase in 2020 over 2019, I'm looking at a 7.9% increase year over year. Because the base, you've taken, the 500,000 is in here, and we didn't need the money. So in actual fact, the percentages are quite different when you start throwing in projected year-to-date actuals. And I wonder whether we could do that. Yeah, since we have it, even if it's September and you're projecting year-end, I think it would help all the new councillors also on the budget committee to really understand where the ball is going. Because I think we've got the info, but if you look at the budget book, it's pretty hard to pin anything down because you don't see all the modifications that have been done.
Certainly, we can do that for the 2021 budget. The 17.8 million is net of that 500,000. So that 500,000 in stabilization in 2019 was used so that we wouldn't have to increase taxes based on the projections for expenses and revenues. Because they've had gapping, one of the things that was done this year was to keep some positions vacant because of all the realignment that was going to happen. It has made it so that they don't require that stabilization funding, so that money will stay in the reserve. The revenue is also exceeding budget, so that's also helped them.
Yeah, but when you're looking at percentage increases, we're not comparing apples to apples anymore. That's my concern with the whole budget process.
Okay.
And I think we have to get beyond that as people get more interested in businesses, you know, you're looking at actuals. Now with the total savings forecast is 618,000 in this particular recreation and culture due to all the work that's been done. What was the cost of the consultants to do the work? Like, I think it's great, and I'm just trying to get a correlation of what did it cost us in outside consultants?
I think we're at 80,000. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think they were about 80,000.
Well, that's money well spent, I've got to say. But it's more interesting to see how much just our own internal staff were able to cut also. Because I think, what'd you say, 100, almost 200,000, 193? So I think our staff, given the power to make the decisions, do a heck of a good job there. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Very good. Mayor Burton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if I could get some clarification on the $500,000. All of the different statements about whether it was in or out left me unable to understand whether it was in or out of the 17.8 or, and you know, is 4.9% accurate or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 17.8 million was the net budget for 2019 for recreation and culture. That net budget included $500,000 in stabilization. In 2020, the net budget 18.67, we have taken the stabilization out. They've increased revenues, reduced costs. That is the year-over-year increase, 4.9% from the approved 2019 budget to the recommended 2020 budget.
All right, so if you restate it as the councillor was asking, to actual spend as opposed to actual budget. 17.8 is 17.3. Am I following this correctly?
Actually, if you took the stabilization out, the budget would have been $18.3 million. The actuals for 2019, I don't know the actual projection because I think they're just finalizing it now. There definitely will be savings. Recreation is projected to come in under budget. So they will come in below that 17.8 number. So I think if you took that, whatever that lower number is, then yes, compared to the 2020, it would be a higher increase.
All right, well, maybe what we're seeing is the tension between trying to do the next year's budget before the year starts, which is by definition before we have the final actuals. And so we wind up having to project, which is a fancy word for guess. So maybe this is the middle ground and the best we can do, but the alternative, if you want real actuals in your budget, is you got to do your budget after the year end. All right, thank you.
Councillor Lischina?
Just a quick follow-up on the, thank you, Mr. Chair, by the way. The EAB program, so that's going to 2026. Do we have any idea of how the percentage of the ash trees that we were able to save based on where we're at now?
So the percentage of ash trees that were injected and are saved is 63%. So it's very high.
And I'm assuming we're not planting anymore anywhere?
I don't know.
In the regeneration?
We are doing a regeneration, but not with ash.
Okay, great. Next question is the 2019 accomplishments. We have that council approved the refresh of the town square, but we've had subsequent information about some underground issues there. So is that still in the budget for this year, or is that being put on hold?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's an assessment being done with respect to the underground pipes, and the budget will be revisited to include all of that work. So right now, we only have the budget as originally imagined for Town Square. It will have to be restated.
Oh, I see. Okay. And Mr. Chair, I think the question is from yesterday's presentation, so I'm not sure somebody else might be, probably not for you, Colleen. But just regarding the, can I ask that question now? Is that, or
Would you
wait?
hold it for just
No
a
problem.
minute, and
I'll
we'll
do that.
finish with
Yes.
Commissioner Bell, and then we'll
Great.
go back to the other team for those
Will do,
items.
thank you.
Councillor Robertson?
I'm just looking at the number of trees planted, and it's down significantly from last year, and I assume there's probably nothing else in the rest of this year that will add. Is there a projection for next year to take it back up then to that amount, at least to the 48,000?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the issue with the number of trees is tied to the seasons and when we're able to actually plant, and also the number of volunteer groups that come in. The other issue is around actual stock and when that becomes available. So if you have a really late spring, your planting is going to be greatly reduced, as it was this year, and the same with the fall. It's tied to the fact that we have limited windows when we can actually plant.
Thank you. And my other question goes to the Harbor's Infrastructure Renewal Program. And I assume that we're not going to add the infrastructure surcharge till 2021 because we won't actually get the docks till then?
That would be correct, and also because we want to work with the boating groups around that. So
Okay.
we want to make sure that they have plenty of notice. We have worked with the Association of Oakville Harbor stakeholders, and we have met with them around this particular issue. They recognize that the docks are at a critical point in time, but they did recommend that we have a strong communication strategy with the boating community, which we've intended to do all along.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hasselfield?
First, let me say thank you to your commission for all the amazing work they do for the community. And I echo Councillor Elger's comments about the staff's efforts and continuous improvement. It is absolutely noteworthy. I'm looking at slide 15 as well. And while I realize that we've already had huge amounts of effort from the staff to create the charts. I think that there's a benefit to the public and ongoingly to have it stated what the base budget is in these charts, because it's a telling, it's very telling, and so that would be a request I'd have. I also want to thank you for the quick research on the Recreation Connection subsidy and how all of the community comes together to support others. And it's not just on the town, it is a full effort. So on to some of my tougher questions. Under emergency services, is there a comparison of the cost of our services to similar sized municipalities?
We will be able to get that for you. One thing that you need to be aware of is that when we do comparative analysis with other municipalities, you want to look at population, but you also want to look at vulnerable properties or vulnerable occupants, because that will help define what your workload is. But we would be happy to get that information for you.
Okay, thank you for that. My other ask in that area is, given that you've indicated that there's going to be an accreditation report done in 2020, which would possibly make some recommendations around efficiencies for the emergency services, what would be the impact to the community if the additional headcount was not added to fire prevention in 2020?
Through you, Mr. Chair, first of all, the report would not be available in 2020. It's work that needs to be done over 2020 and 2021. Okay. Back in 2007, when the first Fire Master Plan identified this challenge, there was not staff included. Since then, we have had numerous changes with respect to the fire code and also to the requirement that we now have a comprehensive risk assessment plan in place. The fire code changes are significant because in the past, the team used to issue tickets, which is not particularly onerous from an administrative standpoint. Now they issue Part 3 court orders. So the amount of work that was involved is very significant. And one of the things that we did to try and mitigate that work was to issue tablets to all of our fire prevention officers to shorten the amount of time that they had to spend on each of those court orders. So when it was a manual process, it was 3 hours at least, and they've been able to cut it down to about 1 hour, which is a huge time saving. But from a standpoint of risk management, the new community risk assessment program is going to require us to be a lot more proactive than what we are right now. The way that we work right now is basically on a complaint standpoint, and we are always reactive. With the new legislative requirements, there is a strong view that we, as fire services across Ontario, are going to have to become very proactive. And this in part is because of response to a number of very high-profile fires, particularly in Toronto and around high-rises, vulnerable occupancy, and what can we do to mitigate those risks more effectively. So that would be a significant challenge if we don't get the staffing in 2020, because they're required to work on that community risk assessment plan.
Thank you for that detail, and I look forward to the comparison. My next question is around just clarifying, under EAB program and the 2.2 million, will that include work around invasive species?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because what's happening with forestry is that we are starting to transition from looking at a specific invasive species to dealing with a number of invasive species that are starting to attack our trees and shrubs. So invasive species, you will see a transition from EAB specifically to a broader category so that we can combat issues like Asian longhorn beetle. We had the gypsy moth situation in Southeast Oakville. There's a number of issues that are starting to emerge, and as a result of pollution, climate change, all those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you for that again. Onwards to transit. So I'm wondering what changes in the services have been incorporated to provide transit access to the new Oakville Trafalgar Community Center. And in particular, I'm asking because we're thrilled to have the new community center opening in September 2020. But we have pockets in our neighborhood that do not have direct access to that community center. We've made such an investment, it would be a shame that we cannot find a way to get people there that would value and use it. So I'm wondering what's been built in to provide that access to the community center.
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this time, we have not built in any additional service through transit. One thing that council may wish to consider is, as a result of the upgrade that we will be getting in terms of the scheduling software, it does allow us to work with prescribed or defined areas. We could come back and provide you with a costing on a pilot if you want to consider that, but there is nothing currently in the 2020 budget.
So for clarity, has the ride-hailing app been piloted at all?
No, the upgrade, we have not received it yet.
Right. So would it be ideal to pilot it, if I'm understanding you correctly, it'd be ideal to find a way to pilot it, to test it before you would expand it to a broader part of Oakville?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be that the transit team goes back, looks at what the options are, and we present you with a briefing note on that.
Okay. And would we have that before we make a decision on budget?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. On to waterfront. So as some of the council colleagues would know, we have a group that has been passionate about trying to help us view the waterfront in a way in terms of access, to go in and enjoy Lake Ontario. Have any dollars been built into the budget just in terms of making it a bit easier on some of these dynamic beaches for them to get in and out of the water and use it from a swimming perspective or a kayaking perspective?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would take that back. I know, and we will report back on it. I know that the development engineering team was working with Lost around potential access as well, and also the Parks and Open Space team have also spoken with Lost. So why don't we report back on any changes that are included in the 2020 budget?
Those are my questions for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Very good. I've got Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great questions, Janet, and some of the same as I was going to ask. However, can we go to slide 6? And this is in your ward, and Ward 3, but I have I've brought this up on many occasions, the grant funding for the repurpose of the coach house for community use. Mm-hmm. Totally agree with it. I think it's a great piece of property that can be purposed for our community. But the challenge down there, as you're probably aware, is that the parking issue on King Street, with respect to you have Ercles Estate, you have the Historical Society, now you have the Coach House, you have the Lawn Bowling Club, and you have the Oakville Club, all in that vicinity. Is there any consideration in the budget to look at, when you repurpose the Coach House, to look at rezoning that piece of roadway to parkland for parking and reconfigure it for better parking? Because I think there's some potential purpose there to alleviate traffic or parking issues we're going to have in the future, knowing full well now we're bringing the coach house on. So that's just basically just my comment. Could we have something come back on that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And on slide 10, what I'm really excited about is the urban forest management plan. Mm-hmm. I think this is something that we're ahead of the curve in a lot of municipalities across Ontario and even Canada, and I'm really thankful to our staff for doing this. And also with respect to the efficiencies, because we're in the tree protection business and a private tree bylaw, but also we're cutting trees down for development. And there's some confusion with our residents in saying, you're doing this, but you're doing this, and they don't really understand. And and what I'm finding is a lot of our residents are calling through me, and we're going through forestry, where it might be through another department. Is there still the consideration to look at the two departments and bring it together as one functional, efficient operation with respect to tree management?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, and I will start and I'll ask our acting CAO to finish. I know that there's work being done through the Planet initiative, particularly around permitting. So that's my understanding, but Jane may be able to elaborate a little bit more.
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry. Colleen is right, through the Planet program, we are looking specifically at that. I'm not so sure that it's the consolidation of departments to do that, but at least being able to layer a piece on the front through a better use of Service Oakville or other means in order to direct the calls to the appropriate place or answer them at the first call when they call in. So that means that we have to upgrade a lot of our Amanda systems, integrate that with the systems that forestry has, so that the answers can actually be given potentially right at Service Oakville when a call comes in.
Thank you, Jane. So is there a cost initiated through a budget process? Would there be a cost, or is that just an internal manipulation?
Well, a little bit of both. There is a budget amount that's included in the budget for the Planet program, which would include that. But that's a small portion, and it would just be an element within the technology that we would be purchasing to deliver the full program. So there is money in there to enable us to finish it.
And this, asking the question, unfortunately, it kind of digresses out of a budget perspective, but now into an operational perspective. And you were talking about coming together as synergies, working together as not bringing the departments, the divisions together, but looking at some type of reporting that everybody understands we're on the same page with respect to how this happens. And that would be through training, a training process with staff?
I think it would be through, actually several means. It would be through training, but I think it's a technology solution as well, so that those pieces come together, so there's a common data set to provide information out there. And then a service delivery in terms of delivering that information to the public as they call in. So I think it's those three layers that we need to look at operationally in order to be able to deliver that. And that is, I would have to say, directly what the Planet program is to do. It's looking at integrating all those pieces together. So as a customer, when you come in, you don't have to search around through departments or search around through very different permit processes. You have questions, you have a project perhaps you're doing, it's to deliver that project rather than to deliver it in a way that we're organized within the town.
Thank you. My next question is on slide 13. The facility repurposing strategy. Again, that's great news, the flexibility we have to make this happen. As you know, pickleball is just booming everywhere. It's majority of it, not right now, I guess, is indoor, but is there any consideration for outdoor conversion of the tennis? Some tennis courts are not being utilized for pickleball.
We've actually already done a lot of outdoor. So,
did I miss that somewhere?
yeah, so the outdoor numbers is for dedicated courts, we have 10, and for shared courts, we have 11.
Enough. So thank you. I appreciate that. That's it for me. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Mayor Burton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if when staff turn their minds to creating a proposal for a pilot for bus service to the new rec center, if they could remember that we have other rec centers and other people who may benefit from such an approach. So we might want to look at, not broadening the idea so that if this is a valid way to get people to our community centers, that we offer the experiment to all areas. I'm I'm a little wary of any form of increase of buses in Ward 3 because I live there, and no area of town complains more about empty buses than Ward 3. So I know that there are parts of town that are much friendlier to buses, and so let's give them some love too. Thank you.
On that topic, so I'm trying to compile a list of asks for additional information for December 10th. And on this one, I had the staff report on the following items for December 10th. And I had originally written down transit service options for the OT Community Center, but it might be better written transit service options for community centers, recognizing that what we might get back is we have a set of transit options already and they are sufficient or they're not sufficient, or we need to consider what the uptake might be for the new center prior to implementing something, because we have experience with Glen Abbey, we have experience with Iroquois Ridge, we have experience with River Oaks, we have experience with the New Trafalgar Center. There might be some learnings there about how people actually get to community centers that might be relevant for this case as well. Okay. Councillor, how's that feel? Presumably on the same topic?
Yes, and then an additional question. So, no question, I would support that if the analysis can include an ability to assess how people are getting to our great community centers, that's great. However, I will call out that we have a neighborhood that is landlocked to a large degree. Its bus access has been dramatically cut over the last 5 years, and they are not complaining about empty buses. They're complaining about an investment that's been made and their ability to utilize that investment, and in particular youth who should be able to use that community center for all the benefit that the taxpayer has put into it. So I'll move on to fleet optimization as my other question. Is that fleet optimization just within roads and parks, or is it across the whole of the town?
So initially, it is for roads and parks because they have shared vehicles and shared equipment. So it's logical that we would start with that scope, because when you get into transit and fire, their specialty vehicles are very different in terms of equipment.
Okay. Okay, so my follow-up question is, the fleet that we have in parks and roads, have they been assessed from a electronic or battery operated, or just from a climate change perspective in the last few years?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have been monitoring the situation in terms of technology development, specifically for our fleet in roads and parks. We are a little bit away from where we would like to be. There has been greater movement in the transit industry area, but we anticipate that we will be looking at the availability of green fleet for roads and parks probably within 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I have some second-time questioners. Councillor O'Meara? No, you're good. Councillor Lischina, did you have a follow-up question on something that we were discussing here?
Actually, a question for Commissioner Bell. Back to slide 4, which was the gross operating budget. You had indicated that purchase services was 13.3%. What percentage of that is seasonal, or is it all seasonal?
Most of it would be our contracts that we use. So for example, we use contracts for winter control to a very large extent, and we also have outsourced services in parks and open space as well.
I see. And so do we have a retainer for those as well, for those contractors? Do we actually pay money that we may not use the service, or use more than we actually paid?
No, it's usually fee for service.
Fee for service. Thank you.
Okay, any others? I've got a set of questions that I wanted to go through with you. On the capital side, in the world of libraries, we've got both a master plan and a strat plan being proposed as capital items this year. I recognize that they are ever so slightly different purposes. Is there some ability to have the two projects work together as a single capital item, or no?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say no. First of all, the library is a separate entity, so, and their strat plan is very specific to their business area. In the case of the fire master plan, it is a lot more.
Sorry, I didn't say fire.
Sorry.
In libraries, so I'm not talking about fire and libraries. I'm talking about in the library world.
Mm-hmm.
In the plan, we've got a library strat plan, and we have a library master plan.
Oh, I see.
Two items,
Okay.
two different documents that the library is going to work on. One is, as I understand it, designed to feed into our development charge process, and the other is to direct the strategic directions of the library in a more broad way, but there must be some overlap.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, the master plan is actually a combined parks, recreation, and library master plan. And the reason why we do it that way is so that we are taking a comprehensive view of what's going on in the community, where amenities are, and also where amenities can be located together. As you know, and particularly in the north, we've had very successful co-locations of libraries and recreation centers. We find those to be the most well-used and more heavily trafficked, and there's synergies in terms of the actual facility management. So my recommendation would be that we stay the course with respect to the master plans with the other departments. The library strategic plan is more of an overarching strategic framework, and it talks more about the programming side rather than the actual facility piece.
So the library master plan that you described it more as a Parks, Rec, and Library master
It is.
plan. Is that to say that the funding that's allotted here is not just to do the library component, it's actually to do a broader review?
It's the library portion of the broader review.
Okay, thank
So
you.
you'll see it in each group.
Okay, very good. So it's actually, so they're funding their element of the master
Right.
plan from that. Okay, great. On the same.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
a question just on the projections for year end. Like, does it assist having 9 months of actuals to help produce what you think the actual year end will be?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in community services, we actually review our actuals every single month through an interdepartmental team with finance and HR, so that we know exactly where we are at the end of every single month, because we have to manage our cash flows so carefully. We're very much aware that how community services goes is how the town goes in terms of finances. So we are very diligent in the amount of work that we do on that. So when we were developing our budgets, we aligned them back to our actuals to make sure that everything is perfectly aligned. So the synergies between those two are intrinsic to how we do our financial planning.
So it's not guesswork at all then?
It's not guesswork.
Thank you.
Okay, I had a couple more things for you. Council just earlier this month went through a set of community investment projects that we're asking the province and the federal government to provide funding for. If we're successful on one or more of those projects, how does that figure into your budgeting?
I'm going to defer that to our Chief Financial Officer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if those projects get approved, we will be coming back to council with a report on that, and they would be incorporated in the 2021 budget. We wouldn't know if we've got approval on the recreation stream until at the earliest next summer. So it would be in time to align it with the 2021 budget process.
Great, thank you. And then I have a question about the LEAF report. Did you wish to cover those yourself, or do you wish to deal with those separately?
I would suggest, we have the report coming. I would suggest that you hold those questions until that time.
Okay, very good. I will do that. And then the last thing I want to do is congratulate you on the work you've done on the staffing within the recreation center world. It's fabulous work that's gone on behind the scenes that nobody in the public gets to see because it's behind the screen, so to speak. But you ought to be congratulated on the efforts to realign how staffing is done across the rec centers.
Thank you very much on behalf of the recreation team. They deserve all the credit.
So, to all of them then, congratulations. Any last questions before we release Commissioner Bell from the podium? Thank you very much. We will probably come back to you later on when we do a roundup of all the extra memos and asks that we have for additional information. And are you saying you want a break before we move on? I agree. I think that's an excellent idea because we've spent nearly an hour and a half going through this presentation, and I think the next one will take some time as well. I'm going to recommend that we take a 10-minute break. Enjoy your 10 minutes off, and we'll be back. So we're on recess, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. We are ready to start into the Community Development Commission, and welcome, Commissioner. And I guess I should be elevating you now to our new acting CAO, as well as Community Development Commission. Welcome. We look forward to your information.
Good morning. Yes, I wanted to present to you the Community Development Commission budget for today. And you can see on the slide here the programs and services that are offered within the Community Development Commission. I would note that in your budget books, and I think you have in front of you a new sheet on the parking side. So that's page 225. This corrects both the purchase services and the revenue piece. The brief explanation is really the purchase services decreases as well as the revenue. It was really just an accounting process and where to show the loss of revenue as a result of the downtown mitigation work. So that's for your books. So in terms of the overall gross operating budget for the commission as a whole, it's $35.3 million. The commission makes up about 10% of the overall town budget. Many of the departments within the commission are revenue-based, so you can see the drop to $8 million in terms of the net operating budget. There's about $27.3 million that comes in through recoveries through revenue. In terms of how those costs are distributed, 61% of it is out of our personnel or people or staff within our commission. The internal revenues or expenses and transfers is the second largest, and that relates to the expenses that are incurred through the development process from other departments commenting into that process, as well as the transfers to reserves from the various revenue-producing programs. In terms of the distribution throughout the program areas, you can see that in the gross operating budget, building services is the largest, almost 30% of the overall budget, with planning at about 21%. You can see the significant change in building services as you move to the net operating budget. Building is 100% recovery through fees, and they have a reserve that balances them off on each year. That small amount of cost that you see in there is relative to the Committee of Adjustment. Then you can see in the net budget the increase in the percentage that is to the infrastructure planning group as well as the planning services. Planning services offers the policy and the heritage component, and of course infrastructure planning is heavily reliant on our renewal and our growth projects. So in 2019, we had a number of accomplishments that I've shown on the screen here. Under livability, of course, the Livable Oakville review has been ongoing. It started in, I believe, 2018. It may actually have partially started in 2017. There were amendments coming forward dealing with some of the North Oakville pieces. We dealt with resolution of a lot of the North Oakville amendments through 2019. Of course, our cultural heritage landscapes, we've moved further on to those. Of the sites that were identified as part of the overall study, we've moved through. Ercles is a good example. The Oakville Harbor reports that are currently on that look at moving out and identifying what do we need to do in order to ensure that we've protected our heritage landscapes. You had dealt with the cannabis retail stores. The question in the province came out early in this year in terms of whether or not we were going to opt in or out of a retail store. We have, as you're well aware, opted out of that program. We will be reporting back in early 2020 with a report that identifies what's happened throughout the landscape so that council can determine if they want to change the position they currently have or not. The tow truck bylaw, that was, I believe it was early in the fall that came in, and there was recent changes that you dealt with it most recently. We also had a number of local planning appeal tribunal hearings. Planning staff and actually transportation staff and development engineering staff provide witnesses to those cases in order to assist in defending the town's position. So a number of hearings were held in this year, and we have a number of hearings coming up in 2020 as well. In terms of engaged community, the Livable Oakville Plan review was to have extended quite a bit further in 2019, but the province had come out with a significant number of changes to that legislation. We had reviewed, I'm sure you know all the bills, but there was Bill 66, there was the implementation of Bill 139, then there was the Bill 108, there was changes to the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, the Environmental Assessment Act, the Endangered Species. There has been an extensive amount of changes in terms of how it governs all the planning legislation. So in a lot of ways, the Livable Oakville review had slowed down in order to understand what was happening with that legislation. We have commented on the Halton Regional OP review, which is currently underway. I think you have a report coming up on the integrated growth management strategy at the next planning and development meeting. In terms of the accountable government, you see Planet up there, and I will spend a little bit more time on Planet and what that program involves at a later slide, so I won't say much here. We had brought forward, certainly through municipal enforcement, the animal contract recently. And I've put on here, we have, in building our Planet program up, we have put in place several internal dashboards in development engineering, in building, and municipal enforcement, so that we can better analyze how our performance is, how do we balance applications, where do we see things slowing down. It gives us a better tool to manage our business going forward. And you'll see in the performance, the key performance indicators that we get further real changes or improvements in particularly development engineering as a result of having those dashboards at our use. We also had moved forward with a lot of staff training on continuous improvement approaches. So that includes using the lean approach a lot more extensively. We've used that for most of our process reviews, change management, project management, and even a customer journey process, so that we can better map what is currently happening within our development approval process. In 2019, you did see just this fall come forward the Stormwater Master Plan. It's the first stormwater master plan the town had done of this nature. And so we're moving forward with capital projects in order to implement that. Electric charging stations were there. There was a grant money to have about a 50-50 split between town funds and provincial funds in order to put electric charging stations predominantly at our community centers. You'll see a series of improvements either in the construction or the design phase for both our shorelines with Shelburne and the Gerlach Gardens. I would note on the question of the Gerlach Gardens, there was some attention given to Lost in terms of their ability to provide access in that program. So that ability is incorporated within the designs that are currently underway for Gerlach Gardens. In terms of the creek systems, there is some remediations happened on Morrison, and in terms of the design and construction at a later date. And of course, our regular pond maintenance with the Bayshire Pond, which was quite an interesting pond. It was a delicate treatment in terms of how to look at rehabilitating or remediating that pond. Moving on to mobility, you'll see there's a number of projects there that deal with both the roadside, so the completion of Cornwell Road was a major accomplishment actually this year. That was quite an extended program. And of course, the first phase of Lakeshore that was open for the Santa Claus Parade. what is there, with the Phase 2 continuing on into 2020. There is the parking management strategy that's ongoing that council had asked for. We're looking at bringing that forward as a final plan into the spring of 2020. And of course, the pilot program in Bronte right now that's ongoing. I think it has a 2-year pilot program. We've implemented neighborhood 40-kilometer pilot programs in actually 2 neighborhoods so that we can get a better understanding of the implication of that. And of course, we have participated on the automated speed enforcement for quite some time as that program moves forward, and I have more to update on that later in the presentation. So in terms of the key performance indicators, these first set deal with service delivery, really, of our enforcement permit and applications. So you can see that we have, generally in each one of those categories, I'll deal with development applications separately, decreased our investigation time, which you'll see in the first one in terms of bylaw and licensing. We've decreased the time frame that it takes us to issue building permits. And I'm going to note the one permit line you'll see for 20 days. So that's the statutory time requirement for us to issue permits that would be associated with an ICI tenant fit out. This was a particular focus for us last year to see what we could do in terms of our processes to shorten that time frame. As you know, tenants need to be in, they're moving from one location to another, and the timing of making that move is important to them. So we had dropped the number of days to process those permits from 32 in 2018 to 15 in 2019. In terms of I had spoken before about the dashboards that we had put in place. This is particular to development engineering. This deals with the scope site plan, and that's the site plan process that looks at the engineering elements on a site to deal with the stormwater and how that works on a particular site, as well as permits related to road corridor. You'll see in both of those there's been a significant increase in the number of those that have been dealt with in a prescribed time. I haven't shown the timeframes from 2015 to 2017 because our time frame that we set aside for ourselves to deal with them then was actually longer. We've shortened the timeframes for both of those, moving into 3 weeks and 4 weeks. And yet we've still been able to process more applications, percentage of applications in 2019 than we were able to in 2018. And that is in large part to the dashboard that we now have in place so that they can monitor better the timeframes of permits, catch ones that are taking a lot of time, shift resources among staff so that they can manage the workload much more effectively. These set of program outcomes relate more to the quality aspects within the town. The first one deals with the successful enforcement, and that's mostly out of actually the legal department. So you can see we've stabilized that. The percentage of deficient pavement within the network, you can see that has generally been decreasing since 2016. You had dealt with a specific report on pavement network management at the recent council meeting, and there's much more detail actually in that report in terms of monitoring the success of that program. The delivery of our bikes and our per 100,000 population, that's an ISO standard, is shown on the screen, and that remains fairly consistent. And in terms of our traffic control system performance, so that's our intersection level of service, that has maintained stability. So moving into 2020, these are a listing really of projects in the various program areas that we'll be undertaking. These are the major ones that I've listed here. Municipal enforcement strategy, this is the last year of implementation of that strategy, so you will see all of the enforcement elements that are eligible of being shifted into municipal enforcement now done through municipal enforcement. This certainly elevates our ability to be successful in the charges that we lay. Of course, the tow truck licensing program will be rolling out through 2020. We are undertaking a review of our licensing bylaw, so that you'll see in 2020 as well. And again, the Planet program, which is a major initiative within all the program areas within the commission, and I will deal with that in a minute. The Ontario Building Code is undergoing changes, and in fact, they're looking at modernization changes right now, and they're out on consultation on those documents. But there's a fair amount of staff training that goes into those to make sure that our staff can evaluate the applications on the basis of the new code requirements. Of course, we do expect more changes from the province. Probably just a fairly significant one will be the implementation of the community benefit charge. We still have not seen the regulations on that, and that will have significant implications to the town as we move forward. So looking at those implications will take a fair amount in 2020. And of course, the Halton and Livable Oakville Plan reviews will be ongoing. The Livable Oakville Plan will be looking at bringing forward some of those major growth areas, so the Bronte GO Station, the health node that we're looking up in north of Dundas by Palermo, by Bronte, and as well as Uptown and Midtown. We'll be looking at those as well. We do have a lot of work on hearings coming into 2020, which will have an impact on our staffing and the time requirements for many of our staff who will be key witnesses at those hearings. Of course, Lakeshore Road is into its second phase, which we will complete next year. Town Square, as Commissioner Bell had indicated, was certainly approved in terms of its design in 2019. 2020, we'll be looking at what are the implications of the underground so we can put that package together again and move forward with Town Square. We have ongoing meetings with the region in terms of how to sort out what is the underground implications. Spears Road is moving along. Stormwater management plan, we're into the implementation. There's some major pieces with the Maplehurst, the Woodhaven and Westminster pieces that are moving forward. But also the quick wins that you approved in June that allows us to get at some early issues and take a lot of areas out of, give them less risk in terms of implications from stormwater. And of course, we'll move forward with the financial strategy in terms of how to support that. So this is a very busy slide I wanted to present to you in terms of the Planet program. So the Planet program is really trying to move all of our services, all of our development approval services, so that includes permits, development applications, into more of a customer-oriented focus. So focusing more on the customer's project rather than the permit that they're actually required to get for that one particular. Because most of our customers, I think it is about 80% of our customers come in for 4 or 5 permits, or not permits, but a slew of applications that they need to have approved in order to move with the project. So we want to make sure that the experience through those is very consistent. And it's delivered as a package rather than individual silos, for lack of a better term. So it's to create that very positive customer experience, make it easy to use, it's transparent to them so they know where things are at any point in time. To provide that on a digital platform, many municipalities have moved to this in portions of the review, and some have moved in terms of the complete review of applications. And then, of course, whatever system we develop for this needs to ensure that we're meeting the community expectations and the same level as transparency is available to the entire community, and as well our legal requirements. So to give you an indication of the overall time frame, we had completed the building services review in 2018. Out of that work, we did identify many improvements. For example, the ICI tenant fit out that I spoke of before, that really reduced the time for that process. But what it did identify, the building services review, is that many of you can't look at one service in the development approval process because quite often building permit is preceded by a site plan approval, and we really needed to look at the overall program. So we spent 2018 defining what that overall plan is, what were our objectives to move forward, where were some of the gaps so that we need to focus. In 2019, we moved forward with specific projects, and which I'll go to in a minute. And then we expect by 2020 to have more of a complete digital platform for customers to file their information online, review it online, understand the changes that we're requiring online, all the way through to their inspections and their final closeout. At the same time, it will allow staff an ease of reviewing those, so it should save our time in terms of moving forward, because we now have a digital framework in order to deal with better collaboration between departments. It will also provide the general public a lot more information about what is going on in those applications, because they can then access the information that's happening, and they know in real time where it is in the process, what changes have happened, and how is it moving forward. So it benefits the entire community. So in 2019, if you think of the development approval process as an intake, a review of the application, you get the application in, you review it, there is an approval in there, you then need to inspect it to ensure it's complying, and then there's a closeout of that project at the end. We've looked at these four as the basis in which to understand where how we can improve them. In 2019, we focused on the review. You'll see both site plan and building services there. That is one of the biggest gaps that we have had. And so there was quite a focus in those areas, as well as the inspection process, to ensure that we looked at our current inspection process and how it functioned. So the outcome, let me deal first with the foundational projects that you see in that broad orange line in the middle of the screen. At the same time as we are making specific improvements to those processes, we are looking at the very broad e-services from beginning to end to make sure that it's delivering the product that we need at the end of the day. So we may be implementing portions of it through that review, but always keeping clear in sight what the overall requirements of that e-service needs to be at the end of the day. So outcomes that we've gotten out of 2019 is the dashboards, for example, a better way in which to measure. We now have a central contact for booking inspections. We have standardized our process review, particularly in site plan and building. Building has spent extensive time ensuring that their standard operating procedures for every element of review is consistent among the reviewers. And they have, so we have some reduced timeframes to show from that work. In 2020, we're looking at moving more into a customer focus for the programs. I think 2019 was ensuring that we had a good process internally and a staff buy-in in terms of how we're transforming our process. And in 2020, we'll be moving into more of a customer focus with bringing in the digital application submissions, as well as digital tools to review the applications, and we'll have moved to an online system to book inspections, as well as to the inspectors to log their information in the field, so that it is real-time information that the customer has available to them when they're finding out where their inspection has been. So I hope that gives you an overall summary of where we're moving. This is very much a continuous improvement project. We have a number of other projects on the continuous improvement front that we're moving along with. Online licensing, which is an excellent one. It's a fair amount of volume in that. It's also an opportunity to test out online systems, how they work, so that we can transfer those learnings into the Planet program. We are also at the same time reviewing our resurfacing program to ensure we've got good, solid communication between our utilities, the region, and internal departments as we move forward and identify which projects we are going to be resurfacing in the next year. Similar review on our road corridor processes, and the public portal for online services or online surveys. There's quite a few freedom of information requests that come in through the building department. Enabling us to get it onto a public portal will really reduce the time spent through the building department in answering those requests. And the capital budget process, you actually have a report on for your agenda today. So in terms of the tax levy support for the programs, you'll see them listed here in terms of 2020 and 2019, with planning services being at the top of the list and moving down through. Parking at the very bottom is completely 100% cost recovery through their parking system. Building is as well for the building program of it. The numbers you see there represent the Committee of Adjustment. So this is a similar chart that Commissioner Bell had shown, which shows the increase in 2020 over 2019. Infrastructure planning has had about a 3% increase, and that's mostly as a result of a shift of the revenues into municipal enforcement as a result of the implementation of the municipal enforcement strategy. Municipal enforcement, you'll also see about a 3.4% increase, and that's a result of the widened responsibility of the parking officers to deliver on elements of the bylaw enforcement, and that has changed their pay grades. Building services in Committee of Adjustment, it is actually it's an $85,000 or $86,000 increase. And it is a result of the Committee of Adjustment not 100% covering their costs. I think the Committee of Adjustment is a bit of perhaps a success story. We have a drop in the number of applications that are coming into the Committee of Adjustment. We've seen that over a few years now. We also have a drop in the number of appeals we have experienced for Committee of Adjustment. So perhaps the approach that we've been taking in ensuring that our community is well represented in the comments on Committee of Adjustment are being heard among the development community, and they're coming in with applications less often or more in line with where we're going, where the community would like to go. The 5% increase in the planning services is directly related to revenue. And I have another chart that will show the change or fluctuation in the revenues over time. And of course, we've gotten a number of less applications over the last number of years. The recent approval yesterday at the region of the allocation strategy or the allocation program will certainly have an impact on that, which is not anticipated in this budget. So to spend 1 minute on how we deal with our planning revenues. We have in the past tried to project the revenues on an annual basis, and it is so dependent on the timing of an individual developer to decide to develop lands. A size of an application could be quite significant in terms of its fees, so if one doesn't go forward, there's a significant drop in revenue, or if a whole bunch go forward, there could be a significant increase. So we moved from trying to do that on an annual basis to taking an average over 7 years. And I think this has enabled us to minimize the fluctuations on the tax levy. But you will, I think, probably never see the budgeted amount in one particular year match the actual revenue comes in, because we're always using an average. So there were a number of reports. There's 3 reports that are in your package in terms of council reports and referrals. The first one deals with the budget development for capital projects, and I think that was a result of the Spears Road project when it had come through. Staff have set in that report some changes that they're going to make to the way in which they define the budget for each of the capital projects, and really that entails ensuring we have a better definition on project scope. Of course, I should back up and say that really the results of the budget are increasing costs throughout the GTA in terms of infrastructure material itself as a result of the extent of work that's going on, some of the trade agreements that are there, and really the land acquisition costs. That's been driving the changing costs in our capital projects. So through this process, we hope to put in place a better definition of project scope throughout the project, as well as ensuring that our cost estimates are done at each step along the way. So at the feasibility stage of the concept, refreshed again at the detailed design stage, on through the tendering process as well. We also will be working with other municipalities and internally and making sure that the component costs of it are reflective, and budgets are updated on a regular basis to ensure that we're reflecting the current market of what's happening. The next report that you had on was the traffic calming and the speed limit review. There were 4 aspects of that were requested for us to look at. One was the 40-kilometer speed limit zones. So we have identified in that report 23 zones that we could add And they're mostly adjacent to the active parks on local roads and minor collectors. We had a cost of $12,000, which could be incorporated within the traffic calming budget already. So those are pieces that we would be moving forward in 2020. You had also asked about elementary schools on major roads and how we could provide for better support in those areas. We have looked at that. We've identified a cost of $200,000. Of course, on our pedestrian implementation, for pedestrian safety, the first point of implementation is to get the radar signs up to really start to slow people down, and then over the longer term, look at what are the best traffic calming processes we should put on the road. So what we're suggesting and recommending to you, that if you wanted to provide for the additional support around elementary schools on major roads, that the introduction of $200,000 within this budget would allow us to move forward with that first step and have the radar signs in place. The next element that had been asked about was the please slow down signs that you see throughout the neighborhoods, the yellow and black signs. So we have incorporated or can incorporate that within our budgets. I think it would result in about the purchase of about 1,400 signs that would be available, and you can see the cost of that program there, which can be covered within our traffic calming program. The last one is the police officer cutout signs. We did look at that, and staff don't see them as being a short or a long-term fix within the area, and would rely on the other three elements that we identified here as a more complete package in terms of promoting, to add to all of the other pedestrian and traffic calming elements we have throughout our neighborhoods. The last one that you had asked for was the automated speed enforcement update. We had originally recommended as staff that we may wait on that program. Council made it clear that they wanted us to move forward in tandem as the first, one of the first municipalities to get this program underway. At this point in time, they have not yet come forward with the regulations. We know the kind of equipment they're going to use, but the regulations are not yet in place. So as a consequence, no other municipality within Ontario has actually implemented this. We also are at this time trying to define the capacity at our provincial offenses to courts in order to determine what is the potential for revenue in this program. We have not been able to determine that yet, and what we plan to do is bring you forward a report as soon as we have that information in 2020, which would then identify what is the cost of implementing this program so council could consider it at that time. Staff through Jill Stevens, our Director of Engineering and Construction, is involved directly in the team that has been looking at this. And so we are working closely with Burlington, which is another Halton municipality that is looking at implementing this to ensure that we can bring it in as one of those first municipalities. So, capital budget. I've identified the larger projects that you see on the list here. Of course, I've spoken about many of them already, which I really won't spend any time on. They're listed through the listing here. I have identified two issues I think that council was interested in. One was the pedestrian crossings. So there was quite a bit of discussion at the last CSC meeting about the number of pedestrian crossings that we have within town. So that report, and council approved that, was for the 10 pedestrian crossovers through our pedestrian program that we currently have in place. So that's at a cost that you see there that is incorporated within the budget. But also in this year, we will be constructing, either approved through previous budgets or, as you can see, through this budget, 3 more PXOs within the downtown. That's as part of the reconstruction of Lakeshore Road, as well as a pedestrian signal, which is a specific item in the budget at 6 Line and Crosstown Trail. And then there is a pedestrian signal also on Spears Road that is part of that reconstruction project. I think I know there is a memo that council had received at the last meeting that indicated that staff have resources to accommodate 5 more if council wanted to provide that direction. That would be at a cost of about $280,000 that would be required to be added to the budget. So what you see on the screen is what's included in the budget at this point in time to address the PXOs. So I've provided just a summary of our active transportation. Our active transportations are really delivered through three ways. One are standalone items within the budget, which represents that $2.4 million that you had seen in that previous chart. We also deliver them through capital projects, so there's additional $1 million for active transportation projects that are embedded in projects themselves. And then there is also through the development approval process, if a road is being constructed and requires cycling equipment signed or otherwise on that road, then that's built as part of that program. So those are the three main ways of delivering it. So what I've provided here is in 2020, either through the approval of this particular budget or through previous approvals of capital projects in a study, design, or construction phase, these are the number of on-road bike lanes that we will be accommodating in either of those three stages of review, and the multi-use trails and sidewalks, just for your information in terms of our active transportation program. So the overall budget within the commission for capital projects is $62 million. We represent about 53% of the overall capital budget for the town. The bulk of that, of course, 51%, is within the infrastructure planning group, and so that's the group that delivers your roads and your stormwater and your bridges and your active transportation. In terms of within the different projects areas, you'll see the infrastructure renewal at 42%, and that includes your stormwater as all your shoreline and creek studies that happen, as well as your road resurfacing program. Within the growth area, the major projects that are in there are the Spears Road, North Service Road, as well as some of the initial work on Kerr Street. In the strategic priorities, of course, is the downtown project. Community enhancements would be your traffic calming. And in the enterprise initiative, that's the parking element, as well as the EV charging stations are included within that portion. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You have questions, starting with Mayor Burton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On the planning, in the planning area, I'm just looking for some clarification of 5 points. The first thing I'd like some clarification on is, with regard to our 7-year averaging of revenue and costs, do we have a stabilization reserve dedicated to serving that 7-year average? And if so, what is the current balance?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do not have a specific planning reserve. Under the Planning Act, we're not allowed to have a planning reserve. What we use is the tax stabilization. So if there are surpluses in the end of the year, if the revenue exceeds budget, it goes into that stabilization fund, and we fund the shortfalls from the stabilization.
So just to follow up on that, Mr. Chair, do we track it, even though we can't have a planning reserve? For our own accounting purposes, can we be sure that we are achieving our goal with our 7-year, or any, for that matter, average?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we do track that.
So what would be the state of play presently then, Mr. Chair?
Okay. We can report back on that.
All right. Thank you. The next thing I'm looking for clarification on is, when I looked at all of the, there were several lines dealing with trying to improve the speed with which we do things, and that, as I understand it, is driven by some requirements that the province has imposed upon us. And what I want to know is, can you say if the province's required changes to the speed of processing applications is costing us, or if we are able to recover any costs of moving faster? I'm assuming that moving faster is going to require eventually, if it hasn't already, more people.
So the programs that we have under the Planet program, first of all, I'll have to say that the requirements for service delivery under the Planning Act are requirements that have just recently been renewed in Bill 108, which you are aware of, are requirements that I can't see, quite frankly, us meeting in the short term or potentially even in the long term. They are very short timeframes that barely allow time for a report to be provided to council for their approval. In terms of the program itself, it will allow us to deliver them faster because we've streamlined our process. But because these are revenue-based programs, any shortfall or any savings that we have would result in a reduction of the actual fee for service that we charge for that. So in terms of a savings to the municipality as a result of these, there would be, I would think, not very many.
I was focused on increases in costs to the municipality and looking for a reassurance that we can recover them.
We are recovering those through our fee process. So yes, for all of the development-related fees, we can recover that through the fee process. And we do adopt a process of a full cost recovery. So anyone in any department or corporate-wide that contribute to the development approval process is included within the fees.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'm also wondering, it's not strictly a financial question, but it is, after all, the focus of all of this work is to serve the public. So the logical question I want to close with in my questions about planning is, what is the logical impact on public opportunities to participate in the planning process as a result of these timeline changes?
They have the statutory process that's certainly afforded to them through the Planning Act. I think what the Planet program itself offers is an opportunity for them to be more aware of the process that's underway, so that they have awareness of what's happening with the various applications and changes within the town.
So the concern I'm chasing here is if we are cutting drastically the amount of time we have to process an application, my logic says that reduces the amount of time that the province has to participate. And as a former residents association leader that my association cared a lot about public access to the planning process. We thought in the old system that we didn't have enough time to consult our fellow residents and our members. And in some of the cases, we're seeing dramatic changes, losses of time, I would call them, for public participation. I appreciate that putting things on the web, if the public can see them, may give them more awareness of things as they speed through, but I'm concerned about the loss of the contribution of the public to the planning process. And I appreciate that we're making an effort to let people watch the new speed game go by, but I'm concerned about this, so thank you very much.
If I could just add to that, I think that is why when you see the 3 objectives we have for the Planet program, one is customer service, as a person is coming in to bring in a digital service, but we have put an emphasis on community expectations. So I don't see that the process changes that we're making here are going to take away from the community consultation opportunities we have in place. And that is why I think as a municipality, we're not setting an expectation to be able to drive a process that meets the provincial timeframes, which quite frankly are far too short for the community and council and staff to be able to deal with applications. So this will, in essence, take the waste of time through the processing out of it, so that there is more of a focus on the quality of work that we can do for the community.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if the diagnosis is that we can't meet the province's timelines, and the threat, I gather, is that the applicant is then, as soon as the timeline expires, free to go to the local planning appeal tribunal. the only visible incentive I can see for an applicant to wait to do that would be how much longer that would be than our process. Is that right?
Yes, and typically, waiting to get in front of the LPAT process is quite a bit of time, and it's stacking up to even more time, so that in many cases, it is worth the while of the applicant to work through our process.
Are there any provincial consequences for not meeting their new stated timelines?
No.
Were there before?
No, there were, under Bill 139, there were some implications, which is why you see in the performance indicators, we were meeting, we had significantly increased our timeframes of meeting the statutory, because there was the provision in there that said if we hadn't reported within that time, then the council position was not in front of the LPAT board. And so what the Bill 108 does is really returns us to the old process where there are no real implications on not meeting the timeframes.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure if this is relevant after the mayor's questions. I'm going back to the slide 11 with the customer-oriented experience of the integrated development approval process. The idea is to understand, and we've had discussions about this, is to move the applications through in an efficient and a timely fashion for our customers. And the question I would have, and I know we're moving in that direction, the cost implications under budget with this being put in place, is there a major cost implication?
There is a $1.4 million cost to moving this in. That cost is covered because it involves the building services through the Building Enterprise Fund. So it's entirely funded through that building reserve.
And that 1.4 million is across from starting in 28 and concluding in 2022?
The 1.4 million is the cost required for 2020.
2020. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Robertson.
Just to go along with that, when do we foresee the digital plan being up? Like I see the review in work plan for 2020 on slide 13. When do we see it being live?
So in 2020, we are looking at bringing in the digital submission, so you could submit online. We are going to be looking at the review of those applications digitally, so that what we can send back to the applicants is a marked up copy of what they need to do, so it's all consolidated in one location. And we'll be moving forward with the inspection booking and the mobile tablets, so that there is real-time information in the field. So those are the pieces that we're looking at implementing in 2020. The full package of these services would not be until about 2022.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this report.
Councillor, how's it feel?
Just carrying on in regards to the statutory timeframes, and I just may have missed it, but slide 8, it talks about the 27% of meeting the statutory timeframe. Can you just fill that out a little bit more for me? So do you expect that to be the ongoing standard that we achieve? I would like some clarity on that.
So were you looking at the percentage of development applications meeting the statutory timeframe?
Correct.
I don't actually have a projection moving forward in terms of the amount of times we can make the statutory timeframe. As I had said, the statutory timeframe is likely unrealistic.
Right.
And you can see actually in 2017, it was only 15%. That was the time, that was under the regime prior to Bill 139, where there was no penalty if we didn't make the timeframe, and we worked through those applications. You can see in 2018, we increased that to 64%, and that was simply because of Bill 139, and there were implications if we didn't report. The number is dropping again because the time frame given for us to review those development applications is literally too short.
Okay, thank you for that. I have some additional questions as well. Okay, so overall, thank you very much for all the effort to pull all these reports together, et cetera. So I'm going to start with traffic safety. So I know that Director Stephen and her entire team always are worried about and supportive of us trying to find ways to deal with the ongoing struggle of speeding and pedestrian safety. My question is, when I look at the RDS and I look at the PXOs and what's been proposed, does the department see RDS as a better investment in making a culture shift about slow down to the public? Or do they see moving more aggressively on PXOs if the money was available?
So I would suggest to you, it's a package of programs that really fit different circumstances that move you forward. And you shouldn't be selecting one over another, that it is that package of programs that you need to move forward with.
So as a follow-up to that, I appreciate that, and I see the combination that's in the proposal or in the budget right now. If additional funds were available to address the large number of pedestrian crossings that are on the list, would traffic be able to give us a perspective on whether advancing some of those PXOs is in the best interest of our community?
So I actually, if Jill has an answer for that immediately, that would be great, but I'd prefer to report back to you in terms of what you're looking for is what is the best way to spend our money to improve traffic calming and pedestrian safety.
And I'd probably add to that, if additional funds are available, would she recommend that?
Yeah.
Okay, on to active transportation. So I see the 2.4 million. I appreciate that you've given us some kilometer breakdown. Are any of those funds going to work towards improving cycling or access in the Midtown area?
So the budget amounts for the Midtown area for active transportation are out farther in the forecast. There's a number of road projects that would complement and add the active transportation to them. So I believe it's in the forecast, the current forecast, which will need to be updated, is out at 2029. So not in 2020.
Okay. And is it possible to hear from staff about any work that could be done in the active transportation around ease of access to get to the Crosstown Trail from the south through that corridor? Fully understanding we have huge investments that's required by the province and to make Midtown viable, but is there anything that can be done or work planned in this budget to assist with that?
So that is something I'd like to report back to you on.
Okay, thank you for that. On to parking. Can there be just some clarification around I saw that there were reserve funds in parking. Is there a report that tells us how much money is available for future investment in potentially parking garages, et cetera?
There is usually an annual report we take forward that identifies where those funds are generated from and what portion of it goes into the reserve. So that's an annual report we do usually at the beginning of the year.
Okay. And on page 225, there's a statement that says service fees have increased to represent current trends. I just don't understand what that means.
So this is in relation to the fines?
I didn't understand
Where is
what
it
the
on
statement-
that? So,
It's on 225.
yep, and on the revised sheet.
Well, I don't think it changed on the revised sheet.
You see? So perhaps I can fees for parking locations have not changed. Usually we do a utilization study to understand where those fees should be. So they have not changed. We have increased fines by, I think it's $10 per fine. And fines are not increased on an annual basis. They're increased over I think the last time an increase was done in 2015. So it's a lump sum that's coming right now to bring us more current.
Okay. And I'm not sure if this is a question for CAO Closey or not, but I'm wondering where we can find what percentage of the budget is related to external consultant fees.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can report back on that.
For all departments.
That's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Chisholm, you had a follow-up question?
Yes, it just kind of triggered me with respect to the key initiatives, and this is not necessarily a budget consideration, but one thing on the municipal enforcement strategy, and one of the challenges we have with our community is that we have bylaw enforcement, and we always hear that, oh, they're not doing anything, we don't know what's going on, and so forth. There's no charges and so forth. Is it possible through a reporting system of some general report with respect to charges laid or infractions laid, whatever the case may be, just as a measurement for our community to know that we are doing our job?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can look at reporting back on that.
Thank you. And the other one is the tow truck license program. Now this is a new initiative going in and understanding the culture of towing. Are we close monitoring and oversighting the requirements that the tow trucking industry has to implement?
Yes, you've approved a bylaw. We're ensuring that those bylaw requirements are being implemented.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Chisholm, could you just repeat, you had a question prior to the tow truck question, you were looking for some additional information?
Yeah, looking for additional information on charges laid through our bylaw enforcement with respect to infractions that happen in the building or traffic, whatever the case may be.
Not tow truck. But
not tow truck.
But you're not speaking about parking, or you are speaking of parking?
Let's throw it in there.
No, just trying to help our staff in terms of scoping the question.
I just don't want to put a lot of workload on staff, but something that it's good for the community to know through our newsletters and our communications that we are enforcing these bylaws.
So you're looking for information regarding the licensing fines associated with licensing infractions or parking infractions?
Yeah, bylaws, yep.
Yeah, we could look at lot maintenance, the various bylaws we have in place, and the charges that have been laid within those. So whatever amount of information we can give you, we will on all of those various bylaws that municipal enforcement enforces.
Much appreciated.
If I could just add, there was a question, this is completely off the topic of enforcement. You had asked about the patio bistros, so I do have a response for you on that. The fee, it is a pilot project that we had put in place since I think 2014 or 15. And that was in recognition of the work that was happening downtown. It also applies to the other two BIA areas. So the fees back prior to the pilot program were in the neighborhood of, I think, $3,500 to $4,000 in order to have a bistro patio. That may have included an enclosed one as well. And so the purpose of the pilot was really to reduce those fees down to the $250 for an unenclosed patio, and I think it's $750 for an enclosed patio, which really represents the administrative costs of putting those things in place, but eliminates what we had in there before, which would have been any loss from the parking space that it was a result of it, or we actually had a leasing of land cost that was in there. So those costs were eliminated as part of the pilot. We've continued with that. We actually will be reporting back to you in December in terms of the extension of that program through to the end of 2020. And over 2020, we really need to look at what is the long-term charge for those areas as we move forward. Because there has also been a number of issues on insurance and what's the level of insurance to charge. So we as a municipality have looked at that question and certainly would like to be able to ensure we're insured properly. But there is some businesses that have carried on with insurance but a slightly lower level. So we'll look at all those issues as we come back in 2020 with the long-term program for patios.
Through you, Chair, I'd just like to make a comment on that with respect to the insurance. And there was a challenge or an issue last summer with respect to, I'm not going to use the word arbitrary, but an increase in the insurance from a $2 million to a $5 million. Unfortunately, with all the restraints on our restaurateurs and all the constructions going on and all the impediments they've had for the last couple of years, this was a real hit for them. And just to take in consideration with respect to insurance increase to a $5 million is going to put a lot of pressure and strain on our restaurants in Oakville. So please take that into consideration when we're looking at that. Thank you.
Certainly, we did last year actually and recognize some of the older insurance programs, but I would say that most insurance companies are requiring that larger insurance amount with the number of issues that we've had in terms on the roadside and implications on those roadside patios. Actually, insurance companies are actually requiring the increase in any event, but we'll certainly take that into consideration.
And as a part of that is, if we have to go that way, Commissioner, may I suggest we do an early communication with our retailers and our restaurateurs. Thank you.
That's great. Councillor O'Meara, and then Councillor Elgar in Listrana.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Sorry, please go on.
Sorry, Councillor O'Meara and then Councillor Elgar and then Listrana.
Wait your turn there, Councillor. Just a very big thank you actually to everyone, Commissioner, for the work you guys do with this at times unwieldy bunch and the demands that we put on you and putting it all into a budget. I do appreciate it. Just a couple of questions here. In terms of building, the building side of things, are we sufficiently staffed? If it's full cost recovery, are we good where we are from our staffing levels? Not to mention where we're about to go with the allocation, but as it stands today.
So you had recently approved the hire or the filling of about 4 positions within building, which should bring us up to a good level for a regular program. We are looking at what are the implications of the allocation program. It's a fairly large allocation program, larger than we've had in the past. And so we need to look at actually planning, development, engineering, and building in terms of what's the implication of it, and how can we ensure we still retain the same quality review moving forward into that program. So we'll be reporting back in January on the overall allocation program.
I actually believe we specifically mentioned in our resolution as well, and at the regional level to support some contract staff with that as well in terms of how that's going to mold out. So hopefully we can give you some support there. But you did mention as well that the province is looking into some changes to the building code, and then there was some comments. Is council going to get a crack at that or a look at that before the town submits those comments?
Sure, we had provided a memo actually to council on what the overall program was. I think it was actually last week. John Tudor, our chief building official, met with the other building officials as part of the LUMCO group to provide comments in, but we'll certainly follow up with the comments that LUMCO as a larger organization has provided in and see if there's any additional ones that council would want to provide. I think the commenting date is actually coming up next week. So we may be sending one set of comments in through the LUMCO group, and then if there's any follow-up, we'll send those in as well from council.
That would be great. I know that, I know in speaking even with Councillor Dudek and myself, we've recognized a few things about 9-10-foot basements now that are causing issues, about desires to see wiring, put in new builds in terms of that reinstalled, I guess, after it was removed for electric charging vehicles and garages, these sorts of things to make sure that those are included. So I did have a question as well in terms of the working towards the streamlining of the system in the applications process. We are working working in conjunction with the development community on that as well, are we?
We are. We had done some, in order to best identify where the gaps in our service were, or where they saw the constraints. We did a series of interviews with them. Back in 2018, we actually held a workshop with them. So we are consulting with them in terms of how to best move forward on the process.
Okay, yeah, because I don't know about my other council colleagues, but usually where we as councillors find out where the gaps are is the people who are trying to do something and they call us going, I can't believe this is happening. And I just hope that when it's time to fix some of the gaps, that those people who are calling us get to tell you exactly where the gaps are. So if that's happening, that's fantastic. Just to switch to a minute for parking, now when we're using the Honk app, there's a 35-cent charge that goes on to every half hour or whatever the allotment is. Where does that money go?
I'd refer to Jim Barrett.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe it's 25 cents, and that goes to Honk. That's the service charge. In our new contract, we will look at how that is placed in, whether that's eliminated and incorporated into a single charge. But in every municipality, it really doesn't depend on which provider you use. You'll see most of them do take a service fee off of each time you park.
So what's the benefit to us, to them getting 35 cents on each charge? What do they give to the town, or what do they take away from the town that we don't have to do anymore for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's the app. It's the app and the accounting and the collection of the money through that company. That's not something that we could do on our own, so we outsource that portion of it and they integrate into our systems.
Okay, so they would just send us a check once a month of everything they've collected? Is that how that works?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for lack of a better process, absolutely. They send us the money and it's accounted for in our systems.
Okay, so we get human resource savings then because they do that for us and we allow them to tack on whatever the percentage is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we get savings that way. We get savings in technology, in development, all of those areas.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question relates to the private tree bylaw. Do we know how much people have, do we know the breakdown of whether people have been planting trees or whether people have been paying money in lieu of? Can we get a breakdown of where we're seeing how that's transpiring and where that's going?
Absolutely. We can have it ready for December 10th.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Elgar?
Thank you. Jane, congratulations on your new position. If you could go to slide 18, please.
Okay, I'm not going the right direction.
You'll get there.
So, slide 18.
Just keep reversing the arrow.
Oh, that's better. Yeah, the arrow keys. Much better.
Thank you. One of the biggest issues, at least in Ward 4, and I can't speak for the other wards, but I suggest the same issue, it's about speeding. Now, in Vancouver, the RCMP introduced, after a successful campaign in Britain, a thing called Constable Scarecrow. Now, they do agree it's kind of got a flat personality, but what they found is, and this is just based on what they're saying, they have reduced the number of speeding drivers by a whopping 50%. Since that time, they have introduced the program in Ottawa. They've introduced it in Barrie. Halton Hills has one they have purchased. And there are other locations, but I'm wondering why we are not introducing that program to see what we can do to try to slow down the speeders.
Mm-hmm. So actually, for that question, I would call on our Director of Engineering and Construction, because we have done some research looking into it. Quite often, speeding is actually the neighbors on the street who quickly know that that's a flat policeman rather than a full-size one. Yeah?
through you, Councillor Adams, we've added a number of different elements to the traffic calming program for this year. And when we bring forward new programs, we really want to bring forward them as a complete package so we can understand how effective they will be and what the value will be to the residents and as we roll them out more broadly. Putting the police officer cutout out without a monitoring program in place in our minds is more of an education program, and we've got that added this year with the additional slowdown signs, with the work we're currently doing with our communications staff and work that we're doing jointly with other municipalities, whether it's through the Road Safety Committee of Ontario or with our Halton partners and Halton Regional Police. So if we were to put forward a program that involves the cutout signs, we would want to do that monitoring, the before and after speed surveys, to see what the level of effectiveness is. In our work with our research leading up to today to try and determine or to prepare for questions, we haven't found a lot of municipalities that are actively doing that monitoring so that we could get that data and try and translate it into an Oakville perspective. So we haven't recommended them at this time. We do have a full slate of speed surveys that we currently run every year. We've got about 150 of them that we do annually. If we were to do this as a full program, we would have to reallocate some of those resources, which would prevent us from achieving all of the goals we have with the existing programs, the 7-day monitoring that we've committed to before we advance traffic calming candidates as an example. So it was a bit of a balance to see, we've got new good programs that we just introduced mid-year and committed to mid-year with the traffic calming program. Before we add new programs, we want to have that comprehensive program package around them, and we felt from a resourcing perspective, allocating those to the programs we'd really previously committed to was our best bet for this year.
So how do I get around the problem then? If you can't do it, I can buy one. It'll cost me $500, and based on all the complaints I get regarding speeding, I'm willing to do that. What do I need to get bylaw relief so that I can attach them to different poles? Because, can we find out? Because if they're doing it in Ottawa, they're doing it in Alberta, throughout Alberta in different places, they're doing it in BC, how can I get assurance that somebody's not going to steal my Constable Scarecrow going forward? I'm not afraid about buying it. I don't want to have it torn down by our own staff every day.
So we could certainly provide you the requirements under our sign bylaw, because I think that's what you'd have to comply with, and whether or not there are any opportunities for permits or whatever in order to be able to have that sign, which I actually don't think there are, but we can certainly provide you that information if you wanted to purchase one on your own.
No, what I want to know is how come they're able to do it in other municipalities such as Ottawa? Because there's no use putting it on the the lawn, because nobody's going to see it. It has to be out where we have to, I would say light poles would be a perfect example, Jane.
So it would be a program that the municipality would put in, because then it becomes like any other street sign that you could have within the boulevard of the road.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it would be through that process that you'd introduce them.
So you can report back on that then, and that I could, about it, because I don't want to spend the money if in fact I can't put it up where it's needed, where the resident calls to have it installed for a day or two.
So we can report back in terms of what are the sign bylaw requirements for implementing that, so you'd have an understanding of where that sign could be located. We could report back in terms of if council were to adopt this as a program, then what are the implications of that in terms of what changes in the sign bylaw for where it could go, so that you have an indication of the various avenues that you have to go forward.
Okay, so we can hopefully get it going very early in the new year then. It's a bigger problem, and when I see a 50% reduction in BC from the RCMP, that tells me maybe there's something that can be done.
Councillor, I'm going to suggest that you bring this to council for a request for report, because what you're talking about, I think, is not a budget request. You're actually talking about an operational program and the implications around our bylaws and how they would be impacted. So I'm going to recommend that you make a request.
I will do that, and at least I know I can spend the $500 and hopefully we'll
Yeah,
have
because,
something.
I mean, you're talking about, we're talking about how much to have within the budget in dollar figures, and what we're now talking about is an operational process, and that's a
To
different.
make it work.
It's a different question than
Yeah, so-
providing the resources.
Now, the next, on slide 21, if you can go forward, please. Jane, I heard you say you have money for extra PXOs. When you got to this slide, you said that there's other cash or monies available. Can you remind me how much you said that would be?
So the monies that we have available for PXOs are the PXOs that are shown on the screen.
Yes.
They were either money that is included within this budget for 2020, so that's the 10 spaces, and then the 6-line and cross-town trail. The other lines there were in previous budgets. There is no more money in the budget that would accommodate any additional PXOs. The purpose of the memo, I think, that you had received at council in response to the questions that had come out of CSC was an indication that if you wanted to accommodate more PXOs, there was the resourcing capabilities to accommodate 5 more.
Five, sorry, it
But
was
it
5?
would need additional money in the budget, I think at a rate of about 280,000, if you wanted to accommodate the 5 more.
Okay, that's, okay, I just want to make sure I heard that right. So, well, I'm hoping the committee will do something about that. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, Councillor Liszczyna?
Thank you for your presentation, Jane. This may be actually redirected to Mr. Barry, because it's a question about the bylaw enforcement with respect to the 24/7 that we moved to since July. I'm looking at page 234 of the binder, and we have total FTEs at 12 and a half. So so first of all, are we busy after hours? Are we redirecting staff? Because there was some issue last year indicating that we might need more staff. So could you just explain what's happened since?
Jim?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Are we busy? Yes, we're busy. But I think as part of the entire program and the implementation of the municipal enforcement strategy, we contemplated that ahead of time. And we also incorporated technology in our vehicles, license plate recognition software. We've got the vehicles used as an office, so officers can do work right from the vehicles. So that's allowed us to actually operate with the same amount of staff we had before, but add work to them so that they can provide that 24/7 bylaw enforcement that we looked at some years ago. So I think the outcome of the strategy and the outcome of council's request in, I believe, 2016 is that we've added on the ability to enforce 24/7 within the same complement.
Thank you. I think that's helpful to many of the residents who were worried about that. Back to the commissioner. The question about permits and then inspection time. So I guess the KPIs, I'm a little bit confused in the sense that what Councillor Omer had said is that we get the calls from the residents saying, it's been 6 weeks since I haven't gotten an inspection. So in the process, is there somewhere where it says that we've fallen behind on this case or that case, or is that just strictly an individual staff issue?
Well, currently we do track each application. So the Amanda system that we use tracks each application, and so we have a fairly detailed understanding of where it is in the process and whether or not there has been a delay in the inspection time frame. So all that tracking is currently in place.
Okay, so there will be a red light coming up on a certain where it says, we haven't inspected this in 8 weeks or whatever it is? Is that?
Yeah. I would suggest that those are the modifications that we're making to the system so that there are more flags. And that's the benefit, I think, of the dashboards, because you, as a manager, you'll get an understanding right away where certain applications are falling behind the timeframes that we've put in. The timeframes are in part built in. Building is a little bit more advanced than the other departments. But that full flagging is what we intend to be doing through this program.
Well, I appreciate that because it certainly will increase customer experience. Mr. Chair, I did have that question earlier. So do I wait until the end of questions for
I
the
think
commission?
that you are the last questioner here, and so why don't you?
You're between us.
You're between us and lunch. There are some extra questions. Let's hold on to those questions just a teeny bit longer so that we can finish with this set. Councillor O'Meara, and then I've got a couple more over here.
Thank you very much. It actually just, it's maybe a question, Commissioner, for Ms. Stevens. In terms of, I heard her say that they do 150 speed surveys a year, and I'm wondering how those are allocated or how those become entered into the queue. And out of those speed surveys, how many do we actually find are in need of the next step after that? And then are we working towards maybe posting those online so that we can, as councillors, when we get these, we can say, here's the website, the last one was done 3 years, every 3 years this, I mean, how can we make this less resource intensive on the department and make it a little more apparent for the residents who are asking us on that?
Actually, just in the interest of time, that may be something we report back to you on.
Okay.
In terms of all of the questions that you just asked around the speed surveys that we undertake.
Yes, and there are budget implications. That's why I was wondering. I can't imagine how much time and energy and money is spent doing that when maybe there's another way to do it. So I'd be happy to bring a request to report at next council on that. Thank you.
That's an excellent suggestion to create some accessibility and transparency around those surveys. Councillor Hasselfield, you had some additional questions, and then I think I've got Councillor Chisholm.
So just as back to parking, I'm wondering if any dollars are in the budget for any upgrades to Honk to their new tap versus what some of us would say is a bit of a complicated method to paying your parking.
There are provisions within the budget to move to a tap service.
Okay, excellent. And then as a follow-up to, in regards to the great statistics in terms of the number of days to close, given it's will be a full year in 2020 of the municipal enforcement strategy, do you see any further improvements in the number of days to close?
Jim?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's actually a very good question. Because it was a partial year, we only have partial year statistics, which can they may not be absolutely correct, but as the program expands, we may get more users of the program. So it's hard to say where those numbers will eventually wind up. I would anticipate we will be somewhere close to where we are now, though.
Okay, thank you for that. And through you, Mr. Chair, what I would suggest around the reporting on bylaw is I personally would like to see bylaw separated out from parking in terms of infractions, like just that distinction, because property standards and lot, we have, they have uniquenesses in terms of the amount of resource it takes, so just as a suggestion. I have some HR, legal, and climate questions. Do I ask those now, or do I ask those later?
If Councillor Chisholm has any more questions on this topic, let's deal with them first, and then we'll go back to all of the corporate service questions, because I think there might be a couple.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, a trigger, the Ontario Building Code that was brought up earlier. Am I to the understanding, and it's not a budget implication, but it's a 5-year review on the Ontario Building Code. Every 5 years it's reviewed. Is that correct?
I think, as John Tudor has said many times, it started out as a 5-year review, but there has been much more frequent reviews of it of late. And then with the change in government, there is now the modernization of the Ontario Building Code, which is introducing a variety of things into that process.
Is there any formal process, and not again to make initiatives or workloads, where an opportunity of council or members of council and wards, and we have some specific issues, and they were mentioned, like deep basements, and now what I'm having is I have one chap who's complaining every couple months he has to put a new sump pump in, and he's looking at the town to fix it. Well, no, this is how the building code, you bought it, buyer beware. So what I'm suggesting is that when we get into an opportunity for an evaluation or input, is there some kind of a process that the ward councillors could give input?
Yes, there is, actually. The province does a consultation process.
Have we?
So
Sorry.
we could bring forward the information about that process to you anytime they're looking at consultation, so that you can provide input into that when we comment back.
That would be great. Thank you.
Are there any more questions on this topic? I see none. Thank you very much. We appreciate all of the Q&A fielding that you've done, Ms. Closey. We have some questions going back to the other material. Councillor Luciano, you've been very patient, so I'll start with you and then come to Councillor Hasselfield.
I appreciate that I'm not last, so I don't take credit for delay in lunch. So my question goes back to yesterday's presentation regarding program services, and specifically about the elections. So we have in the operating budget forecast 450 next year, and then so the forecast for 2022 when the next election is so it's just over $1 million. So that's how much it costs to run an election. Is that correct? So the non-election years are still money's being put away, and so that way it's not a big hit on election year. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, and so just a quick follow-up on that. I believe I read a letter from the ministry that was in our packages about the province announcing that they are going to be responsible for the electoral lists. So do you anticipate that that's going to be less, human resource used in the election process on our end?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in speaking with the clerk, that is a welcome change. At this time, I don't know what impact that will have on the timing or the staff resources to support the election, but we certainly can report back on that.
So just for this year's budget, we're still putting that amount in and then taking a look closer to the date?
We are, and what we'll do when it gets to the election year, we'll look at what resourcing we need to run the election, and we'll fund accordingly.
Thank you.
Councillor Hasselfield?
I think it might be helpful to know that the province's focus is to move from MPAC generating the voters list and sending it to the town to they're going to, that's a piece of they recently announced that they're reviewing MPAC, and it's quite extensive. So I'm not personally expecting any benefit to us. We were given the list from a provincial agency, well, they don't call the MPAC a provincial agency because they let certain cities have board members on it, but basically it's a provincial agency created by the province, just in the same sense we are. And I think all that's really going to happen is the source of the list is going to change. I don't see any benefit to our budget.
I guess the question is whether it's a better list and whether it creates any efficiencies in the process, but if there is any, it's probably small.
I'm not expecting a measurable benefit.
No, I
agree. Let's stay positive here.
But we can be positive, but I don't expect much. Councillor, how's that feel?
My first follow-up from the other day is HR related. Do we track our overtime costs by department? And given the service orientation that the town and council is so proud of, have we seen is there a trend that can be reported out? Are we asking a lot more, and is it impacting our overtime costs, or how do we get a picture on that?
Is this on? It's on. So yes, we do track our overtime costs. If it would be helpful, we could provide a bit of a summary on our overtime costs by department over the last few years to see how they're trending, if you would like that.
That would be appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you. The next one is for legal, and it's really a follow-up on behalf of Councillor Sandu. There had been some requests around trying to have either set pricing with external legal counsel, negotiating different set rates on projects. So in the spirit of letting her go home and have a great maternity leave, I thought I would follow up on her behalf.
Sorry, my apologies. I was thinking that question was directed to Doug Carr. So could you repeat your question, please?
So it's in terms of the rates. Currently, we use external counsel for their expertise, and Councillor Sandu had been looking for some information on, are we negotiating with external counsel for either on a file-related rate or a reduction in rates? It's an outstanding report.
Oh, Doug is here. So I can answer that in terms of HR and our use of external counsel, and then I'll defer to Mr. Carr. So our use of external counsel is dependent on their expertise. So we do negotiate, but sometimes we're looking for a very specific firm and a specific lawyer in which to help guide us through our process. If it is for collective bargaining, we try and negotiate a per-day rate as opposed to an hourly rate.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Mr. Carr?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. We use outside counsel where there's a specific expertise that's required or because of shortage of resources and workload. And wherever we retain counsel, we negotiate with them in terms of their fees and try and get an assessment of how much the work will cost. In terms of Councillor Sandu's request for report, I've had Dennis Perlin in our office work on that project. He's been surveying other municipalities, and we're coming close to a conclusion about that and would like to and anticipate reporting to council in the next month or two on it.
Thanks very much for that update. And my last question is around some of the climate action work. So in the report that was slide 8 from the CAO report that referred to the GHG per capita, and it shows that we haven't been consistently reporting it. I wasn't clear on, are we making a commitment to report it yearly now, now that we have a climate action department, and is that cost included in this budget?
Come on down.
Thanks, through you, Councillor Adams. So the baseline data that was provided there for the 6.6 tons per capita, that is from the current work from the community energy plan. So that is the capital or the community inventory. So the community energy plan will be updated every 5 years, but through that program, there will be a reporting system, and that will be budgeted as they move through doing inventorying for updating where we are in the community on the reduction. So it is budgeted with the update of the community energy plan.
Okay, but for clarity, so are we talking yearly that we would know how we're trending, or did I hear 5 years?
So that's not determined right now. That'll be determined with the implementation of the community energy plan through the organization that and the board that will be implementing the community energy plan. They could do interim targets. They could also report on certain sectors, so buildings, transportation, and the different areas of greenhouse gas emissions.
Yep.
But to do a full community inventory in the one that we have done in the community energy plan is very intense and quite expensive. And you also don't see the results of many of the actions that you put in place for greenhouse gas emissions within that first year. So really an annual inventory is not worth it to see that reduction.
Is it possible for you to report to council at some point what that cost is? I take you at your word that it's expensive, but expensive to one and expensive to another might be very there might be a cost value in terms of alertness and awareness. and-
Right, so I just want to be clear, though, that the community plan is a community document. It isn't owned by the town, so the funding for that plan and the update to that plan will come from various sources outside of the town.
Okay.
So the town will have a contribution to that, but it won't be a full 100% contribution.
Okay. And my last question then is, just in terms of the number of vehicles within our overall town fleets, every department excluding transit, because we understand their uniqueness, how many of those are electric vehicles or have reduced carbon emissions? And do we have a report that tells us how we've progressed over the last few years?
Great question. Through you, Mr. Chair. So currently, we are working through a fleet optimization review led by the Roads and Works Department. Is Enrico here? No. Oh, are you there? Yeah, I thought he would be right behind me as I answered this. So what that plan will entail is looking at our strategy for fleet greening, what our current inventory of electric vehicles are. We do have electric vehicles in our fire prevention fleet. We have, I believe it's 6 or 7, and we do have hybrid vehicles. So part of the fleet optimization review, which we hope to have complete by March 2020, will have that transition to a reduced efficiency in our use of our gas and diesel in our fleet operations, but also looking at the EV strategy or other alternative technology strategy. So I believe out of that review, we'll be bringing that to council to identify opportunities.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councillor Chisholm, I think you've got last word here.
Well, thank you. I feel privileged. It's just more of a comment with respect to the general presentation for the budget. And it's always been a pet peeve with me, as you know, years and years ago, I used to work for the corporation, and the rates and fees, the manual of the rates and fees is over 125 pages of rates and fees, and I read the first 5 or 10 pages and I'm going squirrel. It's a concentration of looking at all these numbers. Is it possible down the line, is that if there are some fees and rates and fees that are extraordinary, out of the norm, whether they're a plus or a minus on it, and with some kind of rationale or explanation why they're being brought in or taken out. It's just more of I guess, an executive summary, so we can go right to those, knowing full well the other rates and fees are, I understand it because I've been involved with it for many years, so. But for our new reader and getting this 2 days ahead of time to look at it, it's just mind-boggling. And even with my past experience and looking at some of these rates and fees and what they are, I have no idea what they are. So it's just a general comment, is a suggestion that we can have some kind of executive summary on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can look at that. We do post the rates and fees on our website prior to the budget, so I think they were posted November 1st this year. And we advertise that in the paper, but we can look at doing an executive summary to highlight some of the changes. We try to do that in the cover report, where there are some that are changing a bit more. So the fees, there's a cover report with it that has a little bit of information, but we can look at maybe presenting a chart that sort of highlights some of them.
That would be fine for us old people reading on a screen of 125 pages. I fall asleep. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are done with going back in time to the corporate service materials. Thank you very much, everyone, on all these things. We have a number of additional reports that are on the agenda, including the harbors, the bulk loose leaf collection, the traffic calming speed limit review items, and the automated speed enforcement updates. Did staff want to speak to those specifically? Or would members of committee prefer simply to ask some questions of those items?
My suggestion is just ask questions in these reports. They're pretty straightforward, Mr. Chair.
I would tend to agree. And so, members of committee, do you have specific questions on any of these items that you wish to go forward with? Okay, Councillor Chisholm and then Mayor Burton.
I'm going to relinquish my time to worship first.
Very good.
I was going to stand in line behind you and move all of them when you were done.
Well then,
back to me. Just a couple of quick questions on the Harbor Infrastructure Renewal Program. Going to the docks, the new docks, and I understand it. The wooden docks cannot be repaired. Those wooden docks, are they salvageable, or are they just going to be taken away and disappear?
Through your chair, Adams, the wood would really be disposable, but the plastic floats and the hardware that's on the docks, excuse me, would be salvageable. So we'd be stripping those down and keeping them as part of our inventory, because even though we're asking to replace a number of docks at this time, we've still got to repair and replace wooden docks for probably at least the next 7 to 8 years as we roll the program through.
Thank you. My next question is with respect to, this is a tough one, and I've read this report many times on the loose leaf review. I really don't, I guess the question I have with the loose leaf collection, is this a service that is not, I'm not using the word mandatory, is this a service to complement the region, or is the region complementing the towns? I guess that's the first question I want to ask on that one.
So through you, Mr. Chair, that's a very interesting question. And so I believe initially the service was identified to, or intended to supplement the region's yard waste collection. And well, the truth is actually in the data, and quite interesting enough, for the period that we collect leaves, the region collects about 2,000 and odd tons of yard waste. And the period that, and then in that same period, we actually collect anywhere from 3,500 to 4,500 tons of leaves. So the reality is, over time, residents have become dependent on the leaf collection program to collect yard waste.
Okay. And it seems, reading the report and reading between the lines, the issue, it seems, you know, we can talk about weather, we can talk about rain and snow, and the compression of the time of the schedule for pickup. And I think looking at that and reviewing it, I think is probably the best possible scenario that we can have. The suggestion is with respect to the transference or conversion of equipment from loose leaf pickup to snow plowing. Then if the snow goes away and the snow, you've got to take the plows off and put it back into leaf. Is that a practice that we do?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so depending on the type of equipment that we're using, we generally are able to keep the plows, or the plow portion of the attachment on the vehicle. We actually do leaf collection. We use sort of 3 different types of operations. One is, depending on the area, we use a loader crew. So the crew, the loader basically puts leaves in the back of a tandem truck. And then we would have to change the box type of the truck to a salter unit. And then we have a tow behind leaf unit which blows in the back of the truck. Again, we would have to change the box in order to use a salt. And then the third sort of type of equipment, we have a self-contained unit. And the self-contained unit collects and actually stores leaves within that unit, so we can just drop that unit and just get to winter response. The trend is to use those units more. The difficulty is they do require an additional license, and not all our staff have that license, but we are trending that way so that we can be more efficient the way that we turn around and the way we respond to a winter.
So with respect to if there was an efficiency, whether it be manpower or equipment or just the schedule itself, I'm going to ask you as the professional, what would be the best scenario to alleviate any concerns of our residents without they're not getting their leaves picked up on time? Or do I put you on a spot?
Well, so through Mr. Chair, there are a number of issues that sort of impact the collection process, and they're indicated in the report. A lot of it has to do, to be very honest with you, things that are out of our control, right? Like we understand, like residents they play a part of it, how they put their leaves out, and then there's parked cars and all those things. But the reality is, it's really weather dependent, and the way we've been operating over the years is that we do our best. Hopefully, weather contributes to our process, and if we get interrupted by winter weather, we will extend the service into December as much as possible. I do realize there are other agencies, municipalities out there that actually cut the service right off. So we're just trying to do our best to collect the leaves. We do have another benefit that the town has, quite different than any other municipality, is we have a spring collection, and we can also rely on that spring collection. Right now, it's only one collection, but if we run into a period of early winter weather, call it, and the weather doesn't change, then we would then transform our spring collection to help, to help with the leaf collection process, and so that's the best answer I can give you with respect to that.
Thank you.
Councillor, how's that feel?
So first, let me just say, I hope Mother Nature is kinder to you this year, because I totally appreciate you're always caught between a rock and a hard place, between snow and leaves. When you did the comparative analysis for the different municipalities, did that also go deeper into, are they using, when I look at Guelph as an example, are they doing anything differently that allows them to consolidate, other than clearly their volumes are less than ours? Was any of that best practice analysis done, just for our understanding?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, we typically, from a best practice perspective, over the past number of years, have been in touch with some of the other agencies that undertake this service. We use a very similar service to both Burlington and Mississauga. Now Mississauga has one of the biggest programs, in the province, and we're probably a close second, if not second. So all of the types of equipment and the operations that I explained, we're basically, everyone's using the same type of process, and it's and just to add to that, as part of our fleet optimization and utilization study, we are also going to undertake a bit of a service review with respect to leaf collection operations to make sure that we are doing things that we feel is best practice, but just to validate that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Robertson.
We've had some talks, because I get questions from Lakeshore Woods, and Enrico, you've been really great about explanations about why we wait for a certain number of years. And looking forward to budgets, is it, and I got a feel from this report too, that we should look at going further than the 25 years again, and going out further before we start new areas?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, well, it's really dependent on the volumes that we collect. So, our experience is the expansion zones, we do not collect a lot of leaves in comparison to the more mature areas of the town. So there could be consideration, like right now, we've used a rule of thumb 25 years of service. There could be consideration to use a longer period. Mississauga, I believe, uses around 35 years. But it's totally at the discretion of council.
Okay, so would your recommendation that we think about looking at that again?
Based on the data, through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that if you're going to change the services, whether increase or decrease, we can certainly come back with a report. But ultimately, it is up to council how they want to move the service forward. And any change in service, whether we reduce service or increase service, just please keep in mind, it will have an effect on the regional yard waste pickup, because like I said, we actually, no pun intended, we collect the bulk of the leaves, so.
Okay, great, thank you, and especially because, you know, when you deal with an area that thinks they should have it, right now, it's better to have a really good estimation of how you explain that to them, so, thank you.
Okay, I have a leaf question for you too, and that is, may have been me who asked you originally for this report, and one of the things I was trying to get at was, I have about 6 roads that are just north of Glen Ashton in the ward, that are between Glen Ashton and the pipeline, that I think are incorrectly labeled in your mapping in Appendix A, where they are shown as being 12-year-old neighborhoods, but they're actually more like the Section B area. They were actually built longer ago, and they include Parkmount, Grace, Linden Rock, Galloway, Cashie, and the Shaftesbury Court, which I don't know if you know off your top of your head where those are, but they are immediately north of Glen Ashton, and it's a relatively small little pocket. What would it take to add that to the Section B area?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if they are within the age timelines that we had suggested, it would, we could very easily, we need to determine the area and the approximate volume of leaves that we would expect, and we could give you a budget amount associated with that, and then council could decide whether they wanted to add that area to the collection zone or not.
So if I'm correct that those streets are incorrectly labeled in terms of their age profile, they've been lumped in with the H section instead of the B section, could you confirm that and report back to us on the implications of that?
Yes, we could.
Okay, so I'll ask for that to come back then. And then I just had, I'm done with leaves now. Thank you very much. Any other leaf questions before we move on? Then I have one quick question about the slow down signs. One, I just want to confirm the report says bag signs, and right now we're using a coroplast sign. And I think that's consistent with what other municipalities are using. Is there actually an intent to switch to a different format in terms of the type of sign that's being put out there? And the second part of the question was just to confirm that it is being proposed to be included in the recommended budget.
So the intent is to continue with the kinds of signs that we currently have, and we've used the cost estimates based on what our neighboring municipalities have, whether generically we call them bag signs. We'll get the right type and terminology in there. And yes, we're proposing that we incorporate that cost into the traffic calming budget that we've currently asked for.
Great, thank you very much. That's it. Any other questions? I'm going to poll the audience, make sure that we don't have any members of the public who want to provide information to us. I see a whole lot of our staff here, but is there anybody here who wishes to provide information to us on any of the items that are on the Budget Committee agenda for today? Going once, going twice, sold? Okay, I'll restrict it to table then for all these items. Members of committee, we have item number 1, which is the 2020 Operating and Capital Budget Commissioner presentations, and the recommendation is to receive the report. I have tried to keep track of all of the asks for additional information. And I have one more to add here. They are that staff report on the following items for December 10th. I'm getting a lot of echoing here. 1, transit service options for community centers. 2, changes related to waterfront access for users. 3, parking around the coach house. 4, the status of reserves used to manage planning costs. 5, how additional resources would best be applied to improve pedestrian safety if more funds were available. 6, options to improve north-south active transportation routes. 7, amounts paid for external consulting fees. 8, fines collected through enforcement of various bylaws as well as parking infractions. 9, the proportion of cases planting trees versus paying in lieu under the private tree bylaw. 10, report on overtime costs from year to year. And 11 is staff report on the cost to add streets to the loose leaf collection program on Parkmount, Grace, Linden Rock, Galloway, Cashie, and Shaftesbury. Did I miss any other additional asks for information that have come up? I tried to catch as best I could all of the asks for information, but if I've missed something, please let me know. Mayor Burton?
I'm happy to give you a motion for your recommendation, and I think staff understood that those items like overtime and bylaws and all those, we wanted it by category.
Yes, that is my, I was hoping staff understood that.
Yes, I'm just giving them the chance to take note.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much for that. Everyone okay with that? Okay, then all those in favor? Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time on all those things. We have a couple of other items. Number 2 is the Harbors and Infrastructure Renewal Program. The recommendation is that the report Harbors Infrastructure Renewal Program from the Parks and Open Space Department dated November 13th be received, that the recommended Harbor Dock Replacement Program to purchase steel docks be approved, that a new capital project be added to the 2020 budget for the first phase of dock renewal in the amount of $1,100,000 to be debt financed. 4, that a boater infrastructure surcharge be implemented as part of the 2021 rates and fees to cover the cost of the debt payments. It has been moved by Councillor Robertson. All those in favor? That's carried. Number 3 is the bulk loose leaf collection service. The recommendation is to receive the report. I note that we've also asked for additional information under part 1. Councillor Chisholm, you moving it? It has been moved. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 4 is the budget development for capital projects. The recommendation is to receive the report. Councillor Hazlett-Fields moved that. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 5 is the traffic calming and speed limit review items, and that is to approve the funding required, including $200,000 in 2020 for radar speed display signs to implement a major road elementary school traffic calming program as detailed in the staff report from engineering and construction. Can I have a mover? Councillor Chisholm has moved that. All those in favor? That's carried. Item number 6 is the automated speed enforcement update. The recommendation being to receive the report and that staff be directed to provide a report to council in 2020 with a further update on the implementation of automated speed enforcement, including the financial implications of any recommended program. Councillor Hazlett-Fields moved that. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. That deals with all of the items on our agenda. We have no confidential discussion items, and so we will be adjourning. Our next step in our process going forward will be to receive delegations on December 3rd, both at 9:30 in the morning as well as at 7 p.m. We have 2 intakes for that, followed by the deliberations on December 10th. So staff have a long list of materials to get back to us on, and we look forward to that. Thank you very much to all of our staff for walking us through all of the material that you've put together. We appreciate all of that, including the details that are both in the budget book as well as online in terms of the details of the capital program. I do note that staff have said that they will provide to us both the reserves and the debt level materials as well, and maybe she already has them, but in any case, you will be receiving that shortly. Thanks very much, everyone. We are adjourned.